Okay, we're live. Welcome. Welcome to the 46th episode of In Class with Dr. Gray Carr. He's Dr. Gray Carr. Today we're going to talk about Martin Luther King. Yesterday was his actual birthday. Monday we celebrate his holiday. But before we get into that, I watched One Night in Miami last night. And I thought it would be a nice entry point because I don't know what you have planned because I never do. I'm along for this ride like everyone else. But I think it's important for us to reflect on Martin Luther King's legacy through the lens of how it frees us moving forward. And that should be the framework. So as I'm watching this brilliant piece of art directed by the great Regina King, starring four incredible actors playing Jim Brown, Malcolm X, Sam Cooke, and Muhammad Ali, I'm watching a brotherhood, a conversation that came about because of Muhammad Ali, at that time, Cassius Clay, beating Sonny Liston for the heavyweight championship of the world. He was 22 years old. And all of these men are friends before fame, friends after. And I'm watching freedom suss out in so many different ways through conversations with Jim Brown and Malcolm X. Sam Cooke and Malcolm X had a clash. Muhammad Ali and Sam Cooke had a conversation. And in each conversation, Dr. Carr, I'm listening to men in their 20s and 30s talk about freedom through different lenses. This is an era of verses where everything is this one against that one, Booker T versus W.E.B., Martin versus Malcolm. And what I'm learning is that the more we learn, the more our perspective on what freedom should look like should change. But also, as people sitting in this seat, you and I, our job, our role, we had a conversation recently about reading. And you said the best part of reading is rereading, because you come back to a book with more knowledge and understanding and perspective and more wisdom, and you see things you didn't see before. And I'm imagining life is the exact same way, where we're collecting all of these puzzle pieces if we're actively living. And then as we start to put these pieces together, it forms a picture that starts to become clearer and clearer as we collect more and more pieces. So I'm not going to give away this movie because there's so many nuggets in it. And I wrote down a bunch of notes and I was like, nah, that's not fair to people who didn't watch it. Did you watch it?
I did.
Oh,
and I was, thank you for putting on your YouTube site a snippet of the interview you did with those brothers. I don't know if if folks, if you haven't seen it, if you're watching now, it's the same YouTube channel. Go scroll back a couple and watch these several minutes of conversation. Because that comes through in the ensemble.
So just a pause, because
please.
The guy that plays Malcolm X is a Brit. And so I had to ask him about that, because
funny to hear him talk to you.
But you know how we're so caught up right now in that, which never was a thing. We didn't have a problem with Harry Belafonte not being a foundational Black person, or Sidney Poitier not being a foundational Black. But we have a problem with the Brits right now, and I get it, because there's so many roles that could go to different people. But this brother put his damn thing down. But the guy that played Muhammad Ali, towards the end of the interview, I don't know how much of that interview we played. I think we played the whole thing. He jumped into his defense. And I was like, this is the future of what community is supposed to look like. We are not in a battle.
And the past and the future, because this beef is a new thing.
Okay. All right. So lay it up for us, Dr. Carr. I just finished, I watched the end of it this morning. I started watching it last night, and I was like, oh my God, these conversations are the conversations we must be having right now around capitalism and how we fund the things that we want to do. Sam Cooke, I remember watching a documentary. I don't know if you watched The Two Killings of Sam Cooke, but I learned about this man in a way that he's different in this, but there's shades of that same ownership of self. Jim Brown, the athlete, at one point, Malcolm says, you're our weapon. And he was like, no, we're not. We're not your weapon. Muhammad Ali, 22, brash, trying to figure it out, through this spiritual journey, but also ownership, but not quite sure of himself.
Yeah.
We need all of that energy to get to where we need to go. And I was just so pleased that through Regina King's lens, she was able to talk about colorism. Man, okay, let me.
You got me pop, man. I'm thinking.
Sorry.
Wow.
I'm sorry.
No, because I'm just thinking there are a number of pieces that have been written about and around each of those brothers, of course. But I'm thinking now about even context. There's a lot of stuff that's come out recently. It's been published. There's a book called Bullets and Ballots over what was going on in Cleveland during the time. You know, a lot of those folks are still alive. So if you want to know about the Black Power movement in Cleveland, which Jim Brown is connected to very intimately. There are a lot of folks you can talk to still in Cleveland. And then there's another piece on the question of business and Black power, because we've all seen that famous photo of Brown there with Ali when Ali is meeting with the athletes, and the youngest cat in that photograph, who is still around, in addition to Jim Brown, who of those four in the film, in fact, the name of Jim Brown's first memoir was Jim Brown, Last Man Standing. So I mean, he's still physically, but the youngest cat in that photograph, when Ali comes to meet with them, Brown's got the juice to bring the meeting into Cleveland, is Lou Alcindor, who we of course now know as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, in part because a lot of those guys became Muslims because of the Nation and Malcolm. So I mean, Brown, it's interesting because there's so much scholarship around now to talking about that. But go ahead.
But the Nation gets a bright light on it in this film as well, and deservedly, because I think we should start to examine every aspect of, you know, I think we like to glorify some things as well because we're so oppressed that we don't want any blemishes. You can't talk greasy about any of us.
Right.
Outwardly, that's correct. Y'all keep your mouths, as you say, sew your lips up as it relates to Black people.
As old folks used to say, I was overhearing them with my lips sewn shut. I should probably change that metaphor. The Congo have a better one. The Congo are like when you're young, when you get to the age where you can be in the circle, but they still not sure if you have anything that you need to say, they put straw in your mouth. And you know you've reached a level of maturity when they turn to you and say, okay, take the straw out of your mouth and tell us what you think. And once you said that, they said, now put the straw back in your mouth. You know you've done it for real when you can come up to the circle with no straw in your mouth. But
I think it's time for us to start to take the straw out and talk honestly, which we're going to have an honest conversation today. But I also want to say hello to everyone because I came in so excited. I forgot to say hi. Hi, class. How are you?
Everyone.
Thank you for being here. Hit the thumbs up if you're enjoying what you're hearing. Share it when it's over. We appreciate this fellowship because it's important that we have these conversations in these safe spaces. So I'm going to jump out now. All right. Thank you.
No, the two of us, I love the dialogue. So this is what we should be doing. And this is interesting in so many ways because we know that the King is around in 1964 when Ali takes that title in Miami. That's February 1964. I mean, we know Malcolm literally has almost to the day 1 year to live. I mean, he is assassinated on February 21st, 1965. And so it's interesting to see that interaction between these folks. And of course, you know, Sam Cooke, who we all know all of his music, and we know that one song that he composes before he is killed under mysterious circumstances, so to speak, because the narrative falls apart. Anybody seen that documentary? And particularly if you've read, there's a big thick biography of Sam Cooke. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Actually, it's so funny. That's one of the first books that Nick Cannon and I discussed when we were doing a book a week, reading and discussing, because he was talking about the fact, I think at one point he had been linked to a Sam Cooke biopic. He said, yeah, man, let's read about Sam Cooke, because Sam Cooke, as a figure who wanted to own his masters. And of course, you see, as you know, the documentary, you see the thievery in microcosm of what happened to Sam Cooke. It's what happens in Black to us since we got put on those boats. The only thing y'all want from us is our labor, our creativity. Who are you? You, racial capitalism. In this case, very specific you, who's still making money out of Sam Cooke. But at any rate, you know, Cooke, when he records the change is going to come, by many accounts, it isn't even Malcolm. You know, it is attested that was Dr. King's one of his favorite songs. A change is going to come. So even when Spike Lee introduces that song near the end of his biopic on Malcolm X, as Malcolm is driving to the Audubon Ballroom, you know, there's so many parallels. But when we stop to think about it, all of this takes place within a handful of years in the 1960s. All of it.
And the thing again, among people who are in their 20s and 30s,
Oh,
who are
no.
thinking so deeply about the future, the world, Black people, in a way that, as you and I sit here, I'm like, our role is to make sure that we allow people to have perspective, to suss it out, to drop the breadcrumbs, to make sure that we give all of the information so that they can make these groundbreaking decisions that will take us into the next place. But there were so many lessons, the battle around ownership, and Malcolm contemplating his mortality in this moment and making some decisions and changes. Even that, Martin Luther King had evolved towards the end of his life. You've said this on in this classroom. I have a dream and all of this. What Martin said to Harry Belafonte in his last days was, "I fear that I have integrated my people into a burning house." Mm-hmm. So the question on the table today, as I watch One Night in Miami, is, do we come with buckets of water to help extinguish the fire? Do we get out of the house, let the fire burn, mother, burn, let it burn? The roof is on fire. We don't need no water. Let it burn. Do we do that?
3, the roof is on fire. We don't need no water.
So I think that's the question. And as an entry point to Martin, as quotes are going to be flooding the internets of things on Monday, we got a national holiday. Shout out to Stevie Wonder and a host of other people.
No question. And if you haven't gotten to get good Scott Heron's book, The Last Holiday, he tells the story about how Martin Luther King's birthday became a national holiday. Now, Gil, of course, is an ancestor. I went to the memorial service in Riverside and on the west side in New York. But Gil tells the story because Stevie Wonder, of course, is the cultural icon that propels it. And so, but anyway, I just wanted to mention that. Keep going.
Oh, no, I wanted you to go. I'm throwing it to you in terms of, all right, I'll come back in.
Yeah.
No, what am I doing? Okay, there we go. As we contemplate Martin Luther King, and to me, it's a convergence, right? Because I think they were both evolving. I don't know who is not evolving in their 30s. Who's not contemplating life differently, and both men with children, wives, thinking about their future and their mortality at the same time. But what I was thinking about, Sam Cooke did it differently, and Malcolm put it in your face, and they both ended up mysteriously dead. Not mysterious at all, So what is the pathway to freedom? If Jim Brown talks about this, you have agency at some point. You are going down that path, and it's still going to always be met with opposition, because in this country, Black agency is an affront to this democracy. What do we do with that?
I don't have a good answer, a good single answer. And I think, there's a statement that Malcolm X once made and wrote, was compiled. There's a little pamphlet book called Malcolm X on Afro-American History. That's a nice little thing, particularly for young people, because it's very small, very readable. A couple of speeches that Malcolm gave, some quotes. But one of the quotes that is very popular of Malcolm's is, of all of our studies, his history is the one that is best prepared to reward all research. And I think we find the answer to what we do next in what we've done before. It's no different than any other life practice. The thing you do the most is the thing you do the best, more often than not. And what you've raised in terms of parallels is very important. To say that these men and women who were around at the time, let's remember, we all remember Rome, 1960, and there's been stuff written about. I think David Moran's. I'm looking around like I can go find the book. It's a book called Rome 1960 that talks about this in part. But then there are a lot of different books where, remember Muhammad Ali is part of the United States Olympic delegation. He wins the gold medal that year in boxing in Rome. Wilma Rudolph from my alma mater, Tennessee A&I. There's a book Wyoming Attias has published recently called Tiger Bell, which talks about those Tennessee State Tiger Bells, of which she was one. May Fags, Wyoming Attias. My goodness, I start thinking about them. And of course, the one who we know best of all, the great Wilma Rudolph. And of course, we know there was a biopic called Wilma. I think Denzel was in it as a young actor. But at any rate, she was part of that team. And it's very interesting because the politics is beginning to inform even the Olympics at that stage, because we know the Olympics is an international competition, but these are athletes first. By the end of that decade, when they're in Mexico City, 1968, and you can read Harry Edwards, The Revolt of the Black Power Athlete. Edwards is there in a kind of advisory capacity, organizing, coming out of the West Coast, San Jose State. We know, of course, John Carlos and Tommy Smith. Dr. Carlos is still traveling around. He's doing some work right now, some very important work, trying to help next generations think through how we build power and organize collectively. Both of those brothers were punished as part of that Olympic delegation, the Black Power Fist, we know, and those who were not Black from other countries who were in solidarity with them. But by 1968, of course, Ali is being mercilessly attacked in the country of his birth. He went from, at the beginning of the decade, the so-called Louisville Lip, Cassius Clay, the name of, ironically, an enslaver in Kentucky, and to Muhammad Ali. And, it's all fun and games when these athletes are laughing and joking. It's not so funny when they turn to politics. And so, Jesse Owens was the darling in 1936 when he defeated Hitler. And of course, I went to Ohio State. In fact, I went to Ohio State with one of Jesse Owens' great nieces, who was in law school. We were in law school at the same time, Marlene Owens. And, to listen to her talk, repeat family stories about how, Owens comes back, because Owens went to Ohio State, but he couldn't live on campus. So Jesse couldn't even make a living off of his fame when he returned as the hero to help smash Hitler and all this old BS they run. In movies, they still make to that regard. But what you see is that this isn't just inconvenience segregation. This is structural inequality. You got Jesse out here racing horses, but Jesse Owens in his 20s, in the 30s, comes back around. And in 1968, they send Jesse Owens into the Olympic team, the U.S. Olympic team, to tell the Negro athletes to calm down. And those young people confront Jesse Owens in Mexico City and say, hey, man, what the hell is wrong with you? They sent you out here to run against Hitler. Do you remember that? And 30 years ago, almost 40 years ago, well, no, about 32 years ago, and Owens breaks down into tears. Now, how do I know that? How do we know that? We know that because Jesse Owens wrote several kind of memoirs, books over the arc of his life. And the last one he wrote, it's called Black Think. But he wrote a book called I Have Changed, because he said those young people opened my eyes. Now, Black Power was something that was a difficult thing for me to navigate, as it was for many of my generation. However, I understood where they were coming from. And I thought about myself as a young man. I loved it. And, for me and for us, I think it's always very important. You talk about, you ask and you think about, we talk about what to do next. And, we always think about recovering our memory. This is a constant theme in our conversations. And again, I love to evoke and encourage us all to explore what Jacob Carruthers again called the deep well of African thought. In other words, we don't have to turn to the philosophical frames of other people. They're very useful. All humanity has contributed to this universal storehouse of human knowledge. However, that includes the Africans, including our people. So, I think about the ancient Egyptian term, the hieroglyph term, the term, which translates, I guess, roughly in English as my heart of different ages. Ebe is the word for heart and mind. It means your mind and your heart, the same thing. But he said, your experience of different ages, meaning that what you did at 22, at 52, you remember that. Your heart has changed, but your heart still contains that 22-year-old, still contains that 6-year-old, still contains that teenager, still contains that 30-something and that 40-something. My heart of different ages. So, the old Africans thought about that. And they said, this is the value of sitting in intergenerational conversation, because when Jesse Owens comes into their room in 68 with these young people, which includes John Carlos, includes Tommy Smith, a George Foreman, who waves the American flag around. And then, of course, Muhammad Ali comes back in Zaire and pummels Foreman, taking the championship from him. And part of the rhetoric of Ali at that time is, this is the Negro that waved the American flag in 1968 in Mexico City after he won his gold medal. I won my medal in 1960 in Rome 8 years earlier. And when I got back to Louisville and thought about segregation, I threw my medal in the Louisville River. So, again, when Jesse Owens comes in that situation 32 years after he, as a 20-something, has been in that Olympic room representing the United States, ostensibly to smash Hitler, although he comes back to the United States and is defecated on by the country of his quote-unquote national loyalty and birth, those young people confront him. And in that dialogue, Jesse Owens is pulled back, his heart of different ages, to that moment. And some of the things that Owens felt when he was in his 20s. Some of the things he felt on the world stage in Berlin. And of course, we pause here and think about Rayford Johnson. We think about Ralph Metcalf. We think about all those black athletes who have been on the international stage for the United States and then found themselves confronting things when they get back that remind them that, yeah, they love you with that flag when you're running against another nation state, because this is another. In fact, I used to tell my students all the time, when Cuba would play the United States or the United States would play Jamaica or something in a game in the Olympics, I would be like, you know what? They should take off USA and Cuba and put on, for the United States jerseys, just put cotton, and for the Cuban jerseys, just put on sugar. And anyway, because see, you know, you act like these letters make you full citizen and you got all the rights, but they're gonna take, as soon as you get off the air, when you get off the plane coming back, they're gonna take them letters off and remember the color of your face. So why don't we just strip it down to the commodities they stole you from Africa to get? But at any rate, Owens, his heart of different ages is triggered. And so you see him writing through this connection, this dissonance, this opening of his heart of different ages. And so he writes, I have changed. Then he writes Black Think. You know, I mean, he's like, well, I gotta. And so I'm saying all that to say that when we see One Night in Miami, the irony is, I think, that a One Night in Miami, without us taking that brilliantly conceived and executed piece of art, without taking it as a point of departure and not the end of the story, becomes exactly that. One Night in Miami, February 25th, 1964. One Night in Miami, which in fact, people say was based on a true story. Yeah, and at some point, they do end up in the same hotel room, right? When you read, you know, you look at Jim Brown, Last Man Standing, Ali and Jim Brown, Sam Cooke, they're in Malcolm's house room at the Hampton House Motel, you know. And so now, do we know the word by word conversation they're having? No, that's the artist's license. However, as you say, these are real human beings in time and space who are articulating positions that we see them trace in the arc of their lives. And so ultimately, then that becomes our point of departure for then saying, okay, let's do some comparative analysis. You see a Kyrie Irving. He hasn't played for the Brooklyn Nets now in quite a few games, relatively speaking, the early part of the NBA season. You got all the commentators talking about what is he doing, and then you hear people saying, well, he's involved in social causes. We don't know it. You know, you look and say, I don't know what that young brother is going through, but I know that there were previous generations of athletes who got involved in social causes. And I don't know anything about Kyrie Irving. What I mean, and I certainly, one thing I definitely will not do is trust white-facing commercial news media, which is primarily interested in when you're gonna get back on the court, shut up and dribble kind of stuff. They can gloss it with social, movement stuff. But what I encourage folk to do is that whatever craft you're in, look at those who preceded you in that craft. And for those of us who don't practice that craft, if these people have quote unquote platform, then perhaps look at previous generations of folk who had similar platform. And so when you see an Aaliyah, when you see a Sam Cooke, when you see a Jim Brown, when you see a Malcolm X, we're not looking for them in this generation. However, just as individuals have hearts of different ages, so do groups of people. So do people who are grouped in terms of their social identities or their cultural identities. And I'm not talking about identity politics. I'm talking about people who have similar enough circumstances to benefit from asking questions. And so perhaps to assist with that, and I was thinking about it, this morning, we said, let's talk about One Night in Miami right quick. I didn't pull any of the Ali stuff. There's a lot of Ali stuff except this. This is my man, Ishmael Reed. He did a book called The Complete Muhammad Ali. I encourage people to get this book because, in fact, when it first came out, he came to Washington, D.C., and I got a chance to interview him. He came to the bookstore, the Barnes & Noble bookstore on the campus of Howard University, formerly the Howard University bookstore. And the two of us sat for a couple of hours, and we had a public conversation, and just going through, because Ishmael Reed don't pull no punches. He's like you, and he controls his stuff. I mean, most of Ishmael Reed's stuff at this point he publishes outside the United States, and he talks about the relationship. He talks about Ali as a symbol of attempting to build power, and what happens when people buck a system that never intended for them to have power. That's really at the heart of that One Night in Miami. You've got Malcolm X, of course, who is on the verge of being out forever, really, of the Nation of Islam. And it really is, for all intents and purposes. And of course, to think through that, Malcolm isn't here. His children are here, and his wife, Betty Shabazz, is not here. Although Betty and Coretta, in the wake of the assassinations of their husbands, keeping their families together, they form a bond. If you see the documentary Gary, 1972, which talks about, of course, the Gary political convention, the Black political convention in Gary, Indiana, you see that open. And you see Coretta Scott King and Betty Shabazz introduced together, and they're sitting side by side talking. They formed a bond. And it wasn't just about the assassination of their husbands. They were both very deeply involved in politics and in Black struggle and organizational struggle. But so they're not here. The children are here. You see Allah, you see Ilyasha, you see Malaka, you see. I mean, but you have Ali's family. His brother Rahman. If you've seen any of the documentaries, the United States versus Muhammad Ali or some of the other things, you hear Rahman, who was down there in Miami, talking about Malcolm, talking about the nation, talking about him joining the nation, talking about the inner politics of the nation. I mean, there's a lot of those people are still alive. So if you want to know the story, you can't get it from looking at a Netflix film where the nation is evoked, and Minister Farrakhan, who is evoked very near the beginning when he says, "Oh, Lewis X," and again, not giving away anything else, but know that the complex, often contradictory, often collective struggle of our people, individuals and institutions, is something none of us can get from the point of entry of a film or a book or a poem or some music. No, those are points of entry to the thing we need to really link to, which is the living tradition. Again, evoking somebody we talked about this summer, Hampate Ba, the historian, that talks about the living tradition, the mouth to ear tradition. And it's all there for us. So there's Malcolm, right? Looking to continue to build Black independent power. There's Sam Cooke, as we said, who wants to own his masters, but who ends up being taken out of the equation before he can consolidate any of the things that are coming from his gifts. And when you yank on Sam Cooke, everybody falls out. The whole Chicago music scene, the quartet scene. Aretha Franklin talks about being in love with Sam Cooke and them being on tour at the same time with the same tour, and people knocking on doors looking for Aretha Franklin. Did she sneak down there looking for Sam Cooke? C.L. Franklin wants to know. In other words, I mean, but saying how, when they were teenagers now, Sam Cooke and them would come into the churches. And Sam Cooke, of course, we think about him with the Soul Stirrers, right? Cooke, because by the time we see in One Night in Miami, he's out of the Soul Stirrers. But this is his singing, his public-facing singing notoriety comes not out of the secular world, but the church. Like Marvin Gaye later, it's going to be a tension there. Or like W.C. Handy and them before, there's going to be a tension there. Or for that matter, Sister Rosetta Tharpe. For that matter, so we start thinking about how deep this goes. But I'm sitting there, Aretha Franklin, I'm sitting there, and then Sam Cooke and them and his quartet would come through the back door of the church, and we all sitting there waiting on the stage, and they would be in the back and come in like any of y'all, because I'm an old retired usher. I was on the junior usher board. You know how you come in the back of the church, right? So they would come in, the quartet singing, coming down the aisle, and the girls going crazy. This is in the church. So of course Sam Cooke takes all that energy and empties it into his secular career. So when you see Night in Miami, and you see this very powerful series of exchanges between Cooke, who isn't, to borrow language from David Ritz, who wrote a book on Marvin Gaye called Divided Soul. I don't look at it as divided soul. I look at it as my heart of different ages. Because as you said, that versus thing got to go. That's not our paradigm. It's all of it. Well, go ahead. What are you about to say?
And what's even more powerful, we look at that. Malcolm and Sam Cooke both would not be there the next year.
How about that?
Sam Cooke died in December of 64.
Wow. Yes. Yes.
30-something years. I mean, you think about both of these people who are on a journey for freedom, doing it differently, but with the same goal. You know, Sam's like, you got to understand, why should we do business differently than they do it? Let them work for us. Finally, you know, he's given that narrative. You may look at me as a sellout, but I'm actually buying into the notion of Black power financially.
Yes.
And because of that ownership and because of that rejection of the mob, and he wouldn't actually capitulate.
No.
He's not here. He wasn't here in 64 in December.
Right. That's right. And you know what's so interesting? Again, y'all, these are breadcrumbs, right? And again, these are not rehearsed conversations. We having organic conversations in here. Karen, who would you say might be the closest in terms of that aspiration to own and to use their celebrity in the field of music to advance the notion of Black power, using their celebrity and their power and fame as a musician at the time of Sam Cooke's death? Who else beside him?
Oh, was Otis Redding?
Okay. Oh, remember he mentions Otis, because Otis gets killed in that plane crash, right? But yeah. So you got Otis Redding.
He owned himself.
Mm-hmm. Dead young.
Ray Charles.
There it is. We can pause. Okay. Stop right there. Ray Charles Robinson. There he is. Ray Charles is the one. Imagine that. So it isn't, and Ray Charles isn't. At least maybe I missed it. Maybe he was, and I need to go back and rewatch. But if he was, it was in passing. Ray Charles and Sam Cooke have a similar aspiration. Ray Charles dies of old age. So Ray Charles lives it out. Ray Charles gave so much money to HBCUs. In fact, at Morehouse right now, the auditorium named the Ray Charles Auditorium. In fact, that's what, you know. So I mean, Ray Charles parlays is able to bring it off in many ways. You know, I mean, Jamie Foxx, the brilliant actor, and again, it shouldn't be.
Let me ask you this though, because you know, white patriarchy is weird. Is it possible? Because I always feel like if you're somewhat damaged, that they give you the runway. You know, so Ray Charles is blind. He drug addict. You know, he's not Malcolm. Who could not be penetrated at that point in terms. You couldn't dangle a woman in front of him, or alcohol or drugs, uncompromised. Sam Cooke to an extent too, even though they caught him out there in that hotel. I'm asking, there's some uncompromisable people. And some folk who can be compromised or who have, some, flaws, I guess, that can be exploited, tend to get a bigger runway. I was thinking out loud.
That's very interesting. Because as you said that, I mean, now I'm filing back in time, thinking about Blind Lemon Jefferson. I'm thinking about, which of course, a major figure in the early days of recorded sound. I'm thinking,
like, he's no threat. He's no threat to white male dominance.
No perceived threat.
Right. I mean, in their minds, because
it's your daddy and them or my mom and them back in the South, we may call it country dumb. Country dumb. See, you think I'm dumb, and I'm gonna let you think I'm dumb. Wait, you're paying me for the song that you record. No, country dumb, right? In fact, some kind of ways that young brother, well, not so young now, ancestor from Gary, Indiana, Michael Jackson, who they all thought was crazy till they found out he owned the Beatles catalog. And in fact, there's, come
on, I was thinking that too. Go ahead.
John Johnson. Oh man, I can't think of. It's not Michael Jackson, The Lost Tapes. There've been so many Michael Jackson books, but there's a book, and I know I have it around, but anyway, where the book opens with Jackson in that negotiation room, and I want to say he had John Johnson in there with him. I think it was Mr. Johnson. He asks Johnson whether this asking price is too high, but he writes it on a piece of paper and slides it over. Johnson is like, yeah, the price is too high, sends it back. Jackson looks at the paper and says, okay. And those of you who read this book or who know this story, y'all can correct me in the chat, because again, I'll have to refresh my memory by going back and double checking this again, but because it's all in real time. But if memory serves me correctly, Jackson then goes on, of course, to purchase what becomes the Beatles catalog. And Johnson says, in retrospect, that in that moment on that deal, Jackson's a better businessman than me. I was thinking small. This cat was thinking long range. I mean, so the idea of country dumb. No, I have no doubt that Ray Charles, that hit the way he moved through the world in terms of the business world. It didn't take long for them to understand he was a very shrewd business person. But yeah, in terms of pop culture, absolutely. I think that probably played a role. And not to mention the fact that Robinson, I'm sorry, I keep calling him Robinson, Ray Charles Robinson, but Ray Charles, like so many others, Edward Kennedy, Ellington, Duke Ellington, and others, transcended category. You know, he's making money with modern country and Western sounds. He understands the root of all that is the blues. I mean, the African has informed everything that came out of the South. And I don't think this is, in fact, there's a brand new book, and I'm about halfway through it, Will Freelander wrote, called Straighten Up and Fly Right, which is the latest biography of Nat Cole out of Montgomery, Alabama. And it's very, I think this, to me, there is something about these Black women and men who are raised in the South, particularly in Black institutions where they saw Black people doing everything, that kind of creates an expectation when they start negotiating with white structures that almost makes them in some ways incorruptible, as you say. But the way they move through the world is also informed by this capacity to hide their inner intent from the public facing intent, because they understand how to deal with white people. I mean, it's really, that's why I say, I mean, digging into our traditions will allow us to, you know, get into, I think, a very different posture as we move forward. And that doesn't mean one is better than the other, because it certainly is a price you pay when you eat your heart. Egyptians would say. And you just, in fact, the Egyptians have it's a saying. It's one of the wisdom literatures. It might even be in Ptah, but I'd have to check. You know, they always say, never eat your heart. In other words, so when you think, I see these young people, particularly in Black Lives Matter, or I see the young people in the 60s and 70s, Tony Carmichael and them, Rap Brown, don't eat your heart. It's like, you're not going to eat your heart. You're going to say the thing because you're not going to let that thing eat you up on the inside. And so whether it be a Jesse Owens late in life saying them young people made me confront this thing that I've had on me since the 30s, whether it be Jack Robinson in his posthumously published memoir, I Never Had It Made, where he said, I should have never let them use me against Paul Robeson. I mean, you see people near the end unburden themselves, so yeah, I think I'm sure they use Ray Charles. Yeah.
So as we, enter this new era of America, and I have really sat and thought about where we are in history, right? I feel like we're definitely at the end of an era. It is important and incumbent upon everybody with melanin who is watching this right now to walk into your power. This is that time. This is that time to claim your spot.
Claim it.
And they've lost. They look like losers. As we head into this is the way losers behave, the way we watch the insurrection, the way we watch these people in Congress behave. That's how losers behave. Yep. So that means we won. Well, now, I think but the win is not permanent unless we make it so by stepping into it. So my question to you, Doc, and I thank you for having this conversation, because we're going to have an inauguration, new president. Maybe there'll be more violence.
We should pause. Let me footnote this before you get. Who's in charge of the African American participation and outreach and coordination for the inauguration? Adjua. Yeah, shout out Adjua. Yes. I said, Adjua in charge of the what? You said, yeah, that's as close as I'm gonna get into it for now. But I said, okay, so anyway, but go ahead. So yeah, God bless her, because God knows. I was in the grocery store yesterday, Karen, and I promise you, it was like there was no plague. In fact, I said, I just sat in the car for a minute. So I ain't going in here. When I got out, the line was long. I said, y'all still, we not letting the so-and-so in. And I said, why is this? And then it dawned on me, people in the DMV are preparing not to go back outside for a week or two. They got down the street on lock. You understand? So yeah, we are on the cusp. By the time we get together next week, God only knows what we'll be talking about. So yeah. So anyway, go ahead, please. Yes, we're in the middle of that transition.
The roof is on fire. I'm gonna get back to that question. What do we do? What is the plan? And how do you see it in relationship to I'm hearing a lot of healing and conciliation, and we should come together as a nation, and we should put aside all of it. But there's still 74 plus million Americans, putting up air quotes around that, barely human, who see the world quite differently, and the world has changed. It is not going back. And we need to put our foot on the gas to make sure as they attempt to put their foot on our necks.
Well, the world never goes back.
So what are your thoughts, and and how does it relate to all of these other flashpoints, these conversations around power and internal struggles and overcoming this versus nature and the legend or the legacy that Malcolm and Martin left for us?
Oh, that's nice. That's a nice way to. And again, as we think about this, folk, like I say, we're having conversation. We're both teachers, and we know, and this is something that I've tried to learn and get better at, realizing that we never stop learning, never stop working, from elders and master teachers I've observed over the years and known and asked all kind of questions. I'm sure they get tired of me asking questions, and then just sit and watch them. In a classroom of any type, particularly when you're talking about a subject like this, the question of memory and action, particularly when you start talking about our people, the power of connecting what seem at first to be unconnected things is really at the center of any teaching and learning practice, because it allows us all to gain the momentum going forward. So when we see Senator Lankford out of Oklahoma apologizing to the Black folk in Tulsa and in Oklahoma for not recognizing how hurtful his behavior, his comments could be perceived to be. I love the way he said that. Shout out, Senator. You didn't apologize for what you said. You apologized for how it would be perceived. And I respect you for that, because you're a white nationalist and you should say it with your whole chest. I know your chest is small, but you should puff up and say a little bit louder with your chest. But at any rate, there are two Black men in the Oklahoma Senate. Roland Martin interviewed one of them the other night. And I was watching the interview, and the brother was like, it's not my place to accept this man's apology. And he talked to my community. Roland's like, well, what do you think? He said, no, it's not my place to have a way to think. But then as he talked, it was very clear, that's some BS. We know it's some BS. But I'm saying that to say that Lankford, Josh Hawley, Mitch McConnell, Nikki Haley, Mitt Romney, forget what they are saying right now. Understand that what they are going to rely on going forward is a selective narration of this country's institutional memory. They're going to try to pretend as if the last 4 years didn't exist. And in the case of Nikki Haley, who will no doubt run for president, she's going to try to pretend like the last 4 years didn't exist, and at the exact same time pretend that it did exist, because she wants all those white racists to embrace her as a white racist, even though she's Indian. And at the same time, she wants the white people who are uncomfortable with the white racism to embrace her as Republicans. So, wouldn't that be something to see Nikki Haley versus Kamala Harris, two Indian Americans? But anyway, people get caught up on that like that's meaning something. No. Y'all got to look at the structural history. So again, making the connections gives us the momentum to move forward in our collective liberation struggle, which isn't an American struggle. It's a global struggle. It's a human struggle. And that's something Dr. King talked about, which we're going to get to in a second, because we're really already evoking it. Again, in the classroom, anticipating where we're going to end and then back mapping that through the conversation that's unfolding organically allows everybody to see, oh. And then the aha moments, most of which come after we've done the live conversation, really is the point of departure for us doing that hard work of recovery and memory and this kind of thing. But while this structure relies on selectively narrating the past, it never wants to include in that selective narration anything that those of us who also lived through these periods of American history, and that's all of us one way or the other, it never wants to include anything in that narrative that's going to disturb their ultimate objectives in a way that could transform the narrative. So yes, it feels like we're at, as we've talked about, an inflection point. As you said, something broke. And it's absolutely true. But this isn't the first time we were at an inflection point where something broke. When you see One Night in Miami, That's an inflection point. 1960, the so-called Year of Africa, so many of these countries gained their independence. The first countries, 1956, the Sudan, which is in Africa. And then people say, well, the first African country to gain their independence was Ghana in 1957. Sudan, not in Africa. Well, those are Arabs. They're in Africa, and there are many continental Africans who are not Arabs who are in the Sudan. So don't do that. I mean, but again, coming out of colonialism. But 1957, in fact, let's start dealing with Dr. King a little bit. Come on, son. What you got around here? I know I pulled. Dr. King. Yes. King gets an invitation. The Kings, Coretta and Martin. And, Coretta with Martin. Oh, by the way, they want to give that brother Goodman. You can't make this stuff up. Man named Goodman, right? As my friend Erica Savage said the other night on Ron Martin's show, Goodman, the brother who was coming up the steps and drew those white nationalists to him, in part, I imagine, capitalizing on the fact that they racist. So you see him get to the top of the stairs, look down the hall at where the entry doors to the United States Senate chamber is, which is where they all in there barricaded, worried like hell. And in a split second, pulls those white nationalists, pulled that hillbilly horde toward him and pulled them away from their objective. Who knows who would have got murked if they had gone down the other way. But they want to give him, they say, the Congressional Gold Medal. And I'm like, okay, that's cute. I think the first Congressional Gold Medal they gave to a black person was the great Afro Boricua, the great Puerto Rican Roberto Clemente in 1973, because he died in trying to get disaster aid to Central America and in the plane that he rented. But they gave Martin and Coretta King the Congressional Gold Medal a few years ago. I think it was either 2004 or 2006, posthumously, of course. But the medal, when they give you a medal, they put your face on it. So you see the two of them on the medal. I've seen it somewhere. Maybe it's the Library of Congress. It may have been on loan when I saw it. But anyway, I raised that to say 1957, the Kings are invited to Ghana for the independence celebration. Kwame Nkrumah, in fact, puts an open call and tells black people, come on home. We need your skills. In fact, there's a good article by David Levering Lewis, who we've mentioned before, the scholar David Levering Lewis, whose father, by the way, was the principal at Dunbar High School of Little Rock, the same Dunbar we talked about a few years ago, a few months ago, the same Dunbar that sent those students to couple of the students who became part of the Little Rock Nine. But at any rate, David Levering Lewis wrote an article in the American Scholar some time ago called Ghana 1960, because he went there. Maya Angelou was there, of course. Alice Wyndham, who's still alive, St. Louis, brilliant sister. If y'all want to know about the black presence in Central America, talk to Alice Wyndham, who was friends with Malcolm X. They're all there in West Africa, and some of them, Nell Irvin Painter, Dr. Painter, some of them formed the welcome committee when Malcolm X tours West Africa. There's a famous picture of Malcolm with Shirley Graham Du Bois, the widow of W.B. Du Bois, who they moved to Ghana. And of course, after, Malcolm comes to West Africa. That's part. So when we think about Malcolm, we often think about him in the American sense, and we gesture toward him going other places. But really, by the time he makes it into the last phase of his life, he's all over the world. I mean, he's in Nigeria. He meets with the West African Student Union students, and then they give him a name, Omowale, the son who was returned home, the child rather, who was returned home in Yoruba. But at any rate, in fact, I'm thinking now, I see the picture, the famous color picture of Malcolm in his African clothes. There's a little slim volume written by Jan Carew, the former husband of Sylvia Wynne, the philosopher who very important brother who ended up at the University of Louisville, called Ghosts in Our Blood. He talks about how Malcolm is with them in England, and the students, the young students there, are talking to Malcolm about identity and blackness and politics. But I'm saying all that, let me put this in context of Martin Luther King. Martin King, Coretta King go to Ghana for the inauguration in March 1957. Now, what do? How do we move forward? By the way, Eisenhower didn't go, but they sent Richard Nixon to represent the United States. And the U.S. Embassy, it's controlled by white people. Their interest in Africa is the same as their interest in India or Pakistan. Their interest in Central America, Latin America. They looking to see if this government is going to let them keep stealing the cocoa, stealing the ebony wood, stealing the oil eventually, stealing and over. And if this is not a government that's going to help us steal, then we need to undermine it. And we can tell the people at home anything. We're fighting communism, whatever, because these people don't read, they don't study. Now, in Nkrumah, they trying to figure out whether he's friend or foe. Right? Is he friend or foe? Well, he went to school in the United States. Okay, he'd be a friend. Yeah, but he's a Pan-Africanist. Okay, that doesn't bode too well. And the French is in the, because remember now, these are teams. Team Europe never turns on itself when it's Team Europe versus the world. Another word for Team Europe is the international community. When you hear them talk about the international community, that means Team Europe and whoever else they need to pull off their scheme. So, Russia's kind of Afro-Asian. Some of them are not white. Many of them, in fact, millions of them are not white, but millions of them are. So this kind of neither fish nor fowl. China, they just bogart their way up because they're the oldest, the baddest, and eventually they're going to be running the thing anyway in their mind. So, but when they say international community, they meant for years Team Europe. So Team Europe is trying to figure it out. The French are talking to the Americans. The Belgians are talking to the Americans. The English are talking to the Americans. I don't know about Nkrumah. And the French is like, yeah, that dude Secretary, man, he's a bit of an asshole up here in Guinea. Y'all got to watch. And so here's Martin and Coretta King, Ralph Bunche, a bunch of other people dropping down in the middle of this inauguration in 1957. And Richard Nixon and them is like, what the hell are you doing? Here's a famous picture of Nixon talking to King with their white tuxedos on at one of the receptions there in Ghana. I said, yeah, well, my man's invited me. Your man's? Yeah, my man's Kwame Nkrumah. We all cousins. Now, King didn't say that, but here's what he did say. Two good books that I think everybody should get. In fact, this is a great book. If you want to get a book on King, get the things King wrote. So the first book, of course, that he did coming out of the Montgomery boycott, this is Stride Toward Freedom, the Montgomery story. This is the first book he dedicates to Coretta, my beloved wife and co-worker. This is from 1958. This is one from 58. Get Strength to Love, Book of Sermons, right? There he is again, Mike King, Martin Luther King. Get Why We Can't Wait. If you're going to, read Martin Luther King. And then the last book that was published, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. If you got to get one that King wrote, I'd say get this one. But the one I'm going to show you next is one I encourage folk to get to think about Martin Luther King internationally. In fact, it's the best single book that pulls together those things yet produced. It's called In a Single Garment of Destiny, A Global Vision of Justice. It's part of the King Legacy series. Very interesting. Lewis Baldwin, brother who is at Vanderbilt University, he's done a lot of work on Martin Luther King, is editor of this along with Charlene Hunter Galt. Of course, we know the famous Charlene Hunter Galt, the great journalist who integrated, along with Hamilton Hunter, the University of Georgia. If you've seen the recent documentary, Vernon Jordan's documentary of Vernon Jordan, who was a young lawyer at the time, apprenticing under what's the brother's name? Donald Hollowell, who was the great lawyer out of Georgia, who was the kind of counterpart in some ways of people like Oliver Hill and Spotswood Robinson in Virginia and them. So anyway, she wrote the foreword of this. But what this is, and I'm going to show this to y'all. Y'all can pause the video later. Here's the table of contents. These are many of the speeches and writings that Dr. King did on the question of how Black people and we fit into the international conflicts. He did a lot of writing and talking and preaching and analysis around anti-apartheid. Because remember, One Night in Miami, 1964. By then, Martin Luther King has been on the national scene for almost a decade. And this is right after, by the space of a little bit over a year, the Rivonia trials in South Africa that put Nelson Mandela in jail for all those years, almost 3 decades between Robben Island and Portsmouth Prison. And sent Winnie Mandela into a tortured hell that we're still not in deep enough touch with to understand what happened to Winnie Mandela and how she fought back and what it did to her and what it didn't do to her. I mean, so, but this is all happening and Dr. King is commenting on it. He's got sermons in here and speeches on here, in here. I mean, he's talking, for example, Appeal for Action Against Apartheid, July 1962. South African Independence, He gives a talk in London, December 1964. Let My People Go, South African Benefit Speech by Martin Luther King, Hunter College, 1965, December 1965. But the one I want to focus on, again, thinking about Martin Luther King in the context of international politics, Black struggle, and the Pan-African connection, Dr. King goes to the inauguration, both Kings, Coretta and Martin, and he comes back and he gives a talk entitled Invitation to Ghana. He gives that, let me go to the page. It's page 57 so I can read it so y'all can see it. He's in Montgomery. He tells the congregation, yo, we have been invited to go to Ghana. So the congregation, Dexter Avenue. So we know about the Montgomery bus boycott and Rosa Parks, and some of us, we talked about E.D. Nixon, Edgar Daniel Nixon, and the Promo Porter, who's part of the Montgomery Improvement Association and been a old school struggler. Ms. Parks, the youth secretary of the Montgomery branch of NAACP. So we've got all that going on, right? But that's the domestic narrative that we want, that the America likes. That fits nice into the narrative, the long-suffering narrative. But see, this gets messy when you see, wait, the African invited the African Americans to the inauguration because he feels a tie to them, and they accepted. And then they went to that same church that we basically trapped on a bus for the last 60 years, or not on a bus in terms of the bus boycott, and told that they need the money, and the church helped raise the money to send them to Ghana. Yeah, and then when he comes back, he gives a sermon. The Birth of a New Nation. Sermon by Martin Luther King, Dexter Avenue, Montgomery, Alabama, April 7, 1957, where he talks about the fact. In fact, this is what he says. He says, I want to preach this morning from the subject, the birth of a new nation. And I would like to use as a basis for our thinking together a story that has long since been stenciled on the mental sheets of succeeding generations. It is the story of the Exodus, the story of the flight of the Hebrew people from the bondage of Egypt through the wilderness and finally to the promised land. It's a beautiful story. And then he goes on to talk about, he uses that story of Exodus as a metaphor for the exodus of the non-white world from the dying framework of colonialism. Something has cracked. Something has changed. Something is changing. The white world is terrified. Why? Because there are more, and then he starts doing the numbers. He starts talking about how many more millions of people who are not white there are in the world than white people, and how it's over now. But anyway, now, and let me pause here and say that I have never and will never accept the Exodus narrative and the whole notion of the Exodus of the Egyptians as a historical principle. I just can't do it. I'm a person of African descent. I know too much about the history of Egypt, and I've known too many master scholars who've taught about classical African history, and I took too many classes and did too many apprenticeships with those who helped teach the Egyptian language, including my brother Mario Beatty, to ever embrace that. I've seen too many documents, so those of you who are going to look for the Hebrews in Egypt, you're not going to find them in any history. You're just not going to find them. So I just want to say that now. So now this is going to be a spiritual metaphor. Now that, okay, we do what we want to do. Okay, that's fine. And if you wanted to embrace it as a spiritual thing, also understand that if you want to embrace the Hebrew Exodus as a spiritual exercise and as a metaphor, that's fine. Well, that's still black on black crime, because there ain't no white people in the Nile Valley at the time. But it certainly didn't happen historically. So at any rate, thank God we ain't never got to hear Ben Carson again talk about the pyramids being storage bins for grain. I'm like, dude, you should have stayed operating on brains, because clearly you had a gift, and it certainly didn't.
Or not, or maybe that was this show that he shouldn't be operating on brains.
Well, those who are fans of the ABC series The Good Doctor might attribute that to some special gift that he got that just allowed him to focus on that.
Okay.
I'm saying, but what I'm saying, it didn't translate to certainly. And then again, I ain't gonna speculate as to whether or not that's just your spiritual rootedness, because hey, we don't debate religion. People do what they want to do, but just keep that, as John Henry Clark used to always say, don't read the Bible like a history book. We ain't had no problems. But the minute you come in here, start quoting it as a history book, I have a responsibility to our ancestors to stop that. So Dr. King, using Exodus as a metaphor, goes into how all these non-white countries are coming out, and that includes Ghana. And when he goes through the history of Ghana, he goes through the history of black people. He talks about the connection. He said, we came from Africa. We are connected to them. Then he goes through the history of Kwame Nkrumah, all this. I'm going to switch books right quick. That's in this book. Now, this is the talk he gives when he comes back. But watch this. Here's another book that's very good. This is a little cheap book. You can get this, for your elementary, middle school students and put it on the shelf next to that other one. I Have a Dream, Writings and Speeches That Changed the World. Now, this is a good book. James Washington, who edited this book, these are excerpts from a larger book that Washington did. Washington did, he's professor at Union Theological Seminary. Washington did a big old thick book that includes excerpts from all of Dr. King's books, many of his speeches and writings. It's a very useful big book. It's called A Testament of Hope. I couldn't find my copy. I got a couple of copies and couldn't find one this morning. But just you look that up, James Washington. But this is called from that. This is a little mini version. This is nice. This is a wonderful gift for a 12-year-old, or a 14-year-old, certainly of any age. But put this in the hands of a 12-year-old girl or boy and say, hey, take this, put in your back pocket and look at it. In fact, you talk about I Have a Dream. The first time Dr. King spoke on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial was not I Have a Dream. The first time he spoke was a prayer pilgrimage, May 17th, the month after he gave that sermon, after coming back from March, they were in Independence. He was there, he and Coretta. April, he comes back and preaches that sermon we just saw at Dexter Avenue. The following month, May, he comes to Washington. Why? They have a prayer pilgrimage. A little mini march to the Lincoln Memorial. Mordecai Johnson is there. Benjamin Mays is there. It's very interesting. And Dr. King gives a speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. It's not I Have a Dream. Facing the challenge of a new age. Something has cracked. And you know that most of this speech is concept for concept the sermon he gave the previous month about Ghana. King stands on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and he doesn't say, we come to this great seat of democracy with a check that has been in return insufficient funds. He doesn't say, I have a dream. No. He says, those of us who live in the 20th century are privileged to live in one of the most momentous periods in human history. It is an exciting age filled with hope. It is an age in which a new social order is being born. We stand today between two worlds, the dying old and the emerging new. Something has cracked. Something is cracked. The world's not going back to the way it is. He says, now I am aware of the fact that there are those who would contend that we live in the most ghastly period in human history. They would argue that the rhythmic beat of the deep rumblings of discontent from Asia, the uprisings in Africa, the nationalistic longings of Egypt, the roaring cannons from Hungary, and the racial tensions of America are all indicative of the deep and tragic midnight which encompasses our civilization. Oh, this ain't too, wait, are you on CNN and in January 2021? No, this is May 1957. Wow, this is not Have a Dream. No, but it was the same steps. Oh, wait a minute. Our memory. Let us recover our memory so we can have our momentum going forward. Leave him on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, but start with the first public speech he ever gave there and watch how that puts that 63 speech in context. He goes on to say they would argue that we are retrogressing instead of progressing. Shout out to all them people who try to make a false equivalency between Black Lives Matter and the hillbilly horde. Yeah, we know what you're doing. And the more we remember, the more we can predict what you're going to do next. We know you're going to go try to hide Nikki. We know you're going to try to hide James. We know you're going to try to hide Mitch. We know you're going to try to hide, what's my man in Utah? We know you're going to try to hide, Romney. We know you're going to go try to hide. We know you're going to try to pretend I wasn't with them, okay. But guess what? Those of you who read the Bible, now now, y'all devout Christians and Muslims too, who have this in the Quran as well. Didn't Peter deny Christ 3 times for the cock crow? You ain't fooling nobody. I don't know that dude. Yeah, okay. Use whatever metaphor you want. In fact, Jeremiah Wright will be preaching Monday at Howard, tomorrow, Sunday rather. He always preaches at Howard the day before the Martin Luther King holiday. And of course, it'll be virtual this year, and he hasn't missed a beat. And I love Jeremiah Wright, in fact. And so I've been fortunate to be present. I was there, the sermon he gave the Sunday before Barack Obama was sworn in. Barack Obama, who did his best with the crossover dribble to deny Jeremiah Wright, and then still doing it, bruh. It's over. put the straw in your mouth. But anyway, but Jeremiah Wright would use this metaphor. Oh yeah, Jeremiah Wright Reverend Wright would do justice to this metaphor. And believe me, he probably has this memorized. So he goes on. This is King on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, right? 1957, not 1963. King says, we are all familiar with the old order that is passing away. We have lived with it for many years. We have seen it in the international aspect in the form of colonialism and imperialism. This is Martin Luther King. Then he goes on to talk about all the places in the world where Europe has wreaked havoc. Then what does he do? He brings it home. We have also seen the old order in our own nation in the form of segregation and discrimination. We know something of the long history of this old order in America. It had its beginning in the year 1619. Wait, is this the New York Times from the summer of 2019? No, this is Martin Luther King, 1957. And in a minute, we're going to go all the way back. You're like, wow. He says, it had its beginning in the year 1916 with the first Negro slaves landed on the shores of this nation. Now, of course, he means those that fell under the sway of the British, because the Spanish had tried to do that to us almost a century earlier. And we murked them and ran with the Native Americans, and they ain't come back. But anyway, they were brought here from the soils of Africa. And unlike the Pilgrim Fathers who landed at Plymouth a year later, they were brought here against their wills. Throughout slavery, the Negro was treated in a very inhuman fashion. He was a thing to be used. Then he goes through Dred Scott. Then he comes to Plessy versus Ferguson. Then he comes to the idea of what was the impact that had on black people. He says, living under these conditions, the Lincoln Memorial, 1957, 1963, King says many Negroes came to the point of losing faith in themselves. They came to feel that perhaps they were less than human. The great tragedy of physical slavery was that it led to mental slavery. This is King. Now, in a minute, of course, people, and I'm guilty of this as well. We say, read his last book, because you see him process. Yeah, but you ain't got to start with the last book to see King has been thinking about this human struggle of Africans in the United States linked to international struggles for decades before. Now, 1957 is a decade and a year before he makes transition. But I'm gonna pause there and just tell people to go ahead and read that. And let's just take it all the way back, shall we? This is the first volume of, I think by now we're up to volume 7. Clay Carson and those cats out at Stanford, the Martin Luther King papers. And most of mine are in storage, but fortunately, this is one that I kind of keep around. This is volume 1 of the papers of Martin Luther King Jr., these thick volumes of the papers of Martin Luther King. He's got his little high school transcripts and stuff. He skipped 2 grades, right? 9th grade, 12th grade. Benjamin Mays, the man who molded him at Morehouse, with the man they call Negro American School Master. Mays dropped the admission age during wartime at Morehouse to 16 years old. He's trying to keep them boys out of being drafted. And King was one of them cats that got in. Not even on his grades, really, because he didn't have very good grades. He took a test to get into Morehouse. But at any rate, Dr. King, when is Dr. King? Okay, look at young King, contest winner. When did he win this contest? This boy right here. And I say boy because Martin Luther King was a junior at Atlanta's Booker T. Washington High School on April 13th, 1944. In his junior year at Atlanta's Booker T. Washington High School, Martin Luther King Jr. won an oratorical contest sponsored by the Black Elks. So my heart of different ages, young people watching this, Michael King, at the day of his birth, his daddy went down and got both their names changed because it was Michael Luther King Sr., Martin Luther King, Michael Luther King Jr. He got his name changed. Martin Luther King.
Correction. There was no Luther.
There was no Luther.
There was no Luther.
That's right. I always make that mistake. That's right. There was no Luther, just Michael. That's right. So you see then, right. Thank you. Of course, the great theologian Martin Luther, right? The name for them. They changes the names. That's exactly right. Thank you, Professor Hunter. That's exactly right. Martin King, by 1944, April 1944, Dr. King is all of 15 years old. Now, if you're 15 years old watching this, or you coming up on 15, listen to this speech that Dr. King, that young Martin Luther King gave, that won the oratorical contest, sponsored by the Elks. That's the Black Elks, Black institutions. Every institution that shaped Martin Luther King till he left for Crozier, which was right outside in the Philly suburbs. I passed it every time on the train when I was coming back from Howard. I lived in Philly 17 years. In fact, a couple of times I went down there, just let me go ride around in Crozier to say I was here with Martin Luther King. But every institution that shaped him till he got there was a Black one. Booker T. Washington High School, Black. Atlanta. All his elementary and junior high school, Black. Morehouse, Black. Isn't it interesting that the people who killed Jim Crow were produced by black institutions? Charlie Houston, before he went off to Amherst, the man that killed Jim Crow, trained Thurgood Marshall, came out of the M Street School, now Paul Laurence Dunbar of DC. But at any rate, he's 15 years old. Watch this. This is the first line of Martin Luther King 15-year-old speech that he won the contest with. Young Martin stood up and said, "Negroes were first brought to America in 1620. Y'all by date, but he's 15 years old. We cut him a little slack. When England legalized slavery, both in England and the colonies in America." Now we're going to cut him a little slack there too, because, anyway, in terms of England, but not the colonies. The institution grew and thrived for about 150 years upon the backs of these black men. There's the gendered language, but that's okay. This is 2020. We're looking back in retrospect, and he's 15 years old. The empire of King Cotton was built, and the Southland maintained a status of life and hospitality distinctly its own and not anywhere else. On January 1st, 1863, the proclamation emancipating the slaves, which had been decreed by President Lincoln in September, took effect. Millions of Negroes faced the rising sun of a new day begun. Have I heard that phrase? Martin. Ken, is that familiar?
Come on.
I love history. Don't you love it? Don't you love it? Let's do it again. Look at this young cat. He's 15 years old. That's the black newspaper, the Atlanta Daily World contest winner. You 15-year-olds, you see we got to shoot for? This is why you study history. You can leave Martin Luther King frozen on them steps for the rest of your life. You want to look at these silly narratives that want to shape your memory to somebody else's purpose, or you can come have a conversation with yourself. The stuff is here. And then you can have a different kind of vision of the future and a different aspiration. Martin says, did they have habits or thrift or principles of honesty and integrity? He says, only a few. Oh, Martin, your education got some gaps in it. For their teaching and duties have been but two activities: love of master, right or wrong, good or bad, and loyalty to work. What was to be the place of such men in the Reconstruction of the South? Pause. What do we do in 2021? What do we do in 1957? What do we do in 1944? King, 15-year-old King, gestures back to 1865 and says, oh, something has cracked. What do we do? He said, we ain't working for them no more. Only thing I was taught was love of master and loyalty to work. He said, what was to be the place of these men? Let me pause here and just put this in very quickly. Because what you're not going to see on CNN, what you're not going to see on white-face and public media, and unfortunately, too few of our places, but what we need to always remember, when Martin King says, I am the son of a minister, I am the grandson of a minister, I am the great-grandson of a minister. Every one of those ministers that came out of Martin Luther King's line, and he made that point several times in his life in terms of public comments to distinguish himself from being a politician. So all the t-shirts with Martin Luther King and then Barack Obama, it's nice to have black people doing stuff and you can hold them up as role models, but don't confuse someone who is a person working for social justice with a politician. It's nice when politicians do some things that are important, but these are two different roles. And Dr. King was never sutured to them. In fact, if Dr. King was here, people say, what would Dr. King be doing? You asked what he did. Also in this book, and in fact, I'll pull something that folks may not. Here are a couple I just mentioned. My man, Vincent Harding. I loved Vincent Harding. I got a chance to go out into Denver and spend some time with him and his wife before they made transition. This was many years ago. Myself, Aisha Imani, Erica Woods, Erica Asakoye. Now, this is Mark. He helped him write the Why I Opposed the War in Vietnam speech. This is the book, Martin Luther King, The Inconvenient Hero. Get Vince. It's my man, Vincent Harding. People out of Jamaica, New Yorker. There he is right there. The great Vincent Harding. Also wrote another little book that many people don't really maybe get their hand, but look at this. The Movement Makes Us Human. An interview with Vincent Harding on Mennonites, Vietnam, and MLK. It's a little thin book. But Dr. King, if he were here today, he'd be like, okay, this is great. Glad to see Biden and Harris. Oh, wait, hold on. What's your foreign policy looking like? We got a black man in charge of the Pentagon. Yeah, that's cool. You gonna keep dropping bombs? Because when Martin Luther King was dead, black people was turning on him. White people had turned on him. Black people turned on him because he came out against Vietnam. Which guy helped him write the speech? Vincent Harding. Why I opposed the war in Vietnam? A year to the day of his assassination, April 4th, 1967, Riverside Church. Who comes to hear when he does it in Atlanta and starts talking about, I'm going to study war no more? Young Kwame Ture, intergenerational. A year plus into the Black Power move in 1966 that they're making, SNCC and the people affiliated with them. But he still loved Dr. King. In fact, I love something that Kwame Ture said as an elder before he made transition. He said, you know what? The thing about Dr. King, I ain't agree with the nonviolence, but he believed it and he lived his life that way. So those of you would say that nonviolence is ridiculous. Dr. King is crazy. I ask you a question. What are you doing? If you say nothing, I say be quiet. Because this man, he believed in it. I love Dr. King. And you got to admire that kind of courage. You know, so understand we can disagree politically, ideologically, but we all want the same thing, liberation for our people. Dr. King. So Dr. King, if he were here today, don't ask what he would do. Know what he would do. He would be coming for the Pentagon budget. And if they send the black man out, he said, I love you, brother. We can pray together. And we need this, but stop. You were in AFRICOM, right? Get that base out of Africa. And you Africans that are with him, no. He would be,
Let me ask you a question. Yes. The man that sits, that preaches from that pulpit that King preached from is now in the Senate.
Yeah.
Reverend Raphael Warnock.
Yeah.
You just said, you know, there's two different animals, a politician and a social justice leader, a minister.
That's right.
Justice leader and a politician. And let me just, because there are a lot of questions about Martin Luther King's name change. I dealt with it on my show yesterday. I led my show with it. Born Michael King Jr., name changed at age 5 because his daddy went to Germany, right, and fell in love with Martin Luther.
Yes. While you talk, I'm just gonna put up the this is a nice little family tree for Dr. King. So I just want to put that there. People can pause it and look a little later. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Karen. Please.
No. So when his father came back after this Reformation, this Protestant, love of Martin Luther, which is strange, but nonetheless, changed his name. Therefore, his firstborn son also had to change his name. I don't know what that would feel like at age 5 when you've been called Michael and Mikey, little Mike, your whole life. 5 years old, you're pretty conscious, and he was smart.
Yeah.
Name was not legally changed on his birth certificate until he was 28.
Wow.
So,
which means he's deep into public notoriety.
Right. Everyone knows him as Martin Luther King Jr., but it's not.
Did you talk? I'm sure you did. His family and people, they never stopped calling Michael.
Yeah. So I don't know what that means or how that shapes you, but that's a story.
Oh, that's interesting. I think it probably had a profound impact. Well, I don't have to say. I think Lewis Baldwin would write about that. James Cone. I mean, I'm sure a lot of folks have read James Cone's book, Martin and Malcolm in America. King was more well studied in the European Christian tradition. He was more well studied than all but a handful of people in the country. Because remember, in addition to coming up in a household where there were several generations of college trained folk, including his father who went to Morehouse, he comes under the tutelage of Benjamin Elijah Mage, who was a first-rate scholar at as president of Morehouse. And also you see on the scene, and I'll resist the urge to go snatch those volumes over there. I want Howard Washington Thurman, who there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 volumes of the Thurman papers. They finally finished the last volume. Walter Earl Fluker, whose son runs the archive at the Clark Atlanta University Libraries now. Good brother, both of them. So, but these are two who have traveled and had interaction with, particularly when you see Thurman, he and his wife, Sadie Daniel Thurman. Kay, what am I saying? Sadie is Benjamin Elijah Mays' wife. Kay Bailey Thurman. They have contact with Gandhi. The King never meets Gandhi. King meets Gandhi through Mays and Thurman and them, who traveled to India. Mordecai Johnson, who was a minister, which caused tensions because he was a minister, president of Howard University, and some of the academics is like, dude, you're a preacher. You up here being the man. But so King has that background before he leaves for Crozier. And one of the beautiful things about the King papers is you also what Clay Carson and his staff in here, they include some of his graduate papers from Crozier, then from Boston, And you see King grappling with these theologians, Paul Tillich and them. I mean, he's grappling with all of these theologians and he's putting them in conversations. There's a paper in here where he reads the ancient Egyptian theology against the European theology. So when we see the public facing King and we hear him tap into that European genealogy, and of course his father, as you say, coming into contact with Martin Luther, I think there are two things at play there. One of them is the hell-bent determination to forge a leadership class among the Black quote-unquote elite. And I say quote-unquote because they don't mean they better than anybody, but people who have gone to school, people who have benefited from the struggle of our people to collect enough revenue to have a place to live that they own, and maybe some small businesses that they put together, some social networks like an Elks or a Prince Hall Mason, stuff like that. There's a hell-bent determination to use that status for the benefit of everyone else. And for those who consider themselves quote unquote intellectuals, the idea is we must then ground this in the best human traditions of which we are aware. They are not aware that even the way that they've come to this, to quote another line from the so-called Negro National Anthem, we have come over a way which with tears has been watered. In other words, we have come treading a path through the blood of the slaughtered. In other words, we have come with a culture that we have continued to hold on to that got us through. To quote again, then going back now, I'm talking about that. I guess I would tug on somebody like Aretha Franklin, but that would take us back to Rosetta Tharpe and take us back to Marion Williams and take us back to James Cleveland and all them. How I got over. My soul looked back and wonder how I got over. You ain't got to wonder. That is the spirit force. That is the cultural force. That is that deep well. But they're not in a position when Michael, as you say, Michael King Sr. is in school. They're not yet in a tradition, in a position to be able to access that in a way that they can reconcile with the stuff that's in the book. And the stuff in the book is almost exclusively white. So by the time when Michael King is at what becomes Morehouse, which he begins life as Atlanta Baptist College, the American Missionary Association, one of their schools, what you see is that they're grappling with the idea of providing leadership for a mass of people that they kind of look at as, yeah, these are our people, but they are not yet cultured. They are not yet well studied, and we got to lift them up. And you saw that in young 15-year-old Michael King, Martin Luther King's, Michael King, formerly, as you say, his oratory. And, you see Bishop Daniel Alexander Payne, who was the bishop of the AME Church, saying, you Negroes need to go to school. They're dumb, and you got to keep these dumb Black preachers from up here hemming and hawing, and ain't never read no books. So yeah, I think that's the one of the two sources is that determination to acquire that education, even though there's schizophrenia at foot.
Yeah, and speaking of that, to have dual, we also talk about this dual consciousness that Black people have to have. Martin Luther King's whole life was dual consciousness, on some level. I also want to ask you about the Gandhi thing. You said, he didn't meet Gandhi. Gandhi was on record horrific to Black people. Africans in particular, horrific,
no question,
racist. And I think people grapple with, how do you take an ideology from somebody, nonviolence, blah, 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 when he was very violent towards people with melanin, Black people on the continent of Africa? How do we reconcile with that? And as I'm growing, I'm really learning about chewing up the meat, spitting out the bones, and also taking, perspective on things. I think we get hung up on these facts, and it allows us to disqualify folk, because we get hung up on it. Well, he was a racist, so we throw out everything.
That's right.
How do you see it, Doc?
The same way. I mean, I think this is the value of study. This is the value of memory. Just as individuals have hearts of different ages, so do groups have hearts of different ages. The more we learn, the more we adjust using the momentum of the past. Gandhi was useful in terms of a framework for that moment for Dr. King, for the Montgomery boycott movement, which emerges in some ways very organically, building on the thrust of what had come before, but then reaching that inflection point and then surging forward. Now, it's interesting, we pause here and think about this for a minute, because we know that while King is being very critical of what's going on in South Africa. What's going on in South Africa, the tripartite system we talk about apartheid, but that reminds me, there was a president No, I'm not gonna. It was a college, but the founder of Albany State College. Anyway, that's a story for another day. Because he sent a book to the guy who was one of the first leaders of the apartheid government in South Africa, and talking about this question of segregation and education in the United States and in South Africa, and how to do it for Black people in South Africa. He was himself a kind of Booker T. Washington figure in Georgia, and I finally got my hands on it. In fact, I had to send for South Africa from. In fact, the copy I got is the copy that he sent to the guy. It's autographed to him, but anyway, from the guy. But at any rate, there's a real. King grew up in a segregated moment. And so it seems to me that that informs how he perceives this question of strategy and tactic. So when he emerges, he's looking at nonviolence not only as a way of life for him personally, but as also a tactical thing, which he explains in all of his writings, that for some of y'all it's not going to be a way of life, although I think it should, but because I think it's non-existence otherwise, but it's also a tactic. We don't have the numbers here. And of course, Gandhi in South Africa, in a tripartite system where you got white, and of course, whiteness in South Africa fractures once you take away everybody else. You know, those of us who've been to South Africa, spent time in South Africa, taking students there, interacted, sat and listened. Most importantly, when you travel is to listen, to just travel widely, stay with people, listen. You know, we understand that whiteness fractures once you take everybody away. Ask the Boers and the British, you know, the Anglo-Boer War. We can go back. Anglo-Boer War is the origin of concentration camps in world history. If you go back and look at how they use it, that's a story for another day. In fact, I was just reading about that in a book that's completely unrelated, but since I mentioned it because it was on my mind, Dan Stone's book, Concentration Camps, A Short History, goes back to the Anglo-Boer War, which is white on white crime, although blacks are involved. By the time you get to apartheid in 1948, they set up a tripartite system, white on top, colored in the middle. That's going to be the Cape Malay. That's going to be the Indians like Gandhi, who's in South Africa, and then the blacks. And so Gandhi's brutality as a lawyer in South Africa, Gandhi's indifference, Gandhi's negotiation is really, you can really see hints of what become the Hindu nationalism. And there's even a brand new telephone book size book on Gandhi. I got several of those around. In fact, there's a book called Gandhi in South Africa, and I'd have to go back there and dig it out of the back room. But which talk maybe we can talk more about this at a future moment. But the idea is that part of Gandhi's attitude in South Africa is self-interest. And Gandhi's a Gandhi's an Indian nationalist. In other words, his Indian nationalism follows him all through his life, including when he is helping lead the anti-colonial struggle in India, because what he's really after is Indian independence. That'd be nice. Everybody else come along, but shit, I ain't picking you over my people. And so you see the seeds of that in South Africa. He comes to India, and what we see is that I think King respected the nationalism. He's taken the tactic along with the teachings, because part of the thing that the Benjamin Mazes, that the Howard Thurmans, that the Mordecai Johnsons and them learn from Gandhi, they're deepening their spiritual practice. King is taking the spiritual practice, informing his practice as well, but he's also taking the strategy and tactic, because Gandhi ain't that committed to nonviolence, but he's got the numbers. See, the British are the minority. They're the colonizers. We can put them out with this. The salt strikes, we could do that, right? So I think that's the short version of why it's important. And well, yeah, I mean, that's right. Kareem's making this comment in our private chat that he says in 1903, Gandhi says that in South Africa, the white people there should be the predominating race, and the black people are troublesome, very different, live like animals. That's because the coloreds are between the whites and the blacks, and they negotiate in space to operate. And again, he's trained in the British and the European style. In fact, every time we go to South Africa, we take the obligatory tours, and then we get that out of the way, and then we're going to do, every time we go into the old Parliament House, and you see the tripartite parliament. This is where the whites sit. This is where the colored sit. And we got some few of these Negroes we let play with us, but that's to keep them separate. So Gandhi, as my man Randy Maturi wrote in his book, Stigma and Culture, about HBCU politics and the fractures that often develop between folk from the Caribbean, folk from Africa, folk who are born in diaspora, who are born in the United States. He says, everybody's trying to avoid last place. He calls it last place anxiety. Nobody want to be last as long as there's a racial hierarchy. But what King is talking about by the time he gets to be an adult, and you see some of this in this early oratory he gives, is, the world is fracturing. The world is fracturing. So let me just do a couple other things right quick, and then we want to talk a little bit about the so-called Black National Anthem, and I'm looking forward to that. We can do that right quick. Is King, when I said about the ministers, every minister of prominence in his line.
Wait, before you do that, not the Warnock piece.
Oh, Warnock.
What is he? No, it's my fault. But
no, that's my fault. I should have had that in my head. Warnock, I think, he's got 2 years. And there are a couple of ways he could pursue this. I mean, what do I know, right? But it seems to me that I guess he already, I guess it was the King celebration yesterday, made public statements from Ebenezer, his pulpit. And when you go to Ebenezer Baptist Church, those of you who've been there, you know, National Park Service has preserved the original Ebenezer, and also the King home and their Sweet Auburn, the block and everything. Shout out to those Rangers, those women and men. I love them, you know, really. All the National Park Service people, but particularly those Black and brown folk. And there's young people, a lot of young people work for the National Park Service. Every time I go to a site, I just, you know, but at any rate, when they take you in there and show you around, where you see in the stained glass is A.D. Williams, and in the stained glass is Martin Luther King Sr. Now, why do I mention them? Martin Luther King Sr. marries into the minister line. So when you look at the little chart of Martin Luther King's family, you understand that every preacher comes through, you know, Martin Luther King Sr. marries into the line. His wife, Martin Luther King's mother, who of course was killed playing the organ just between Sunday school and morning service in 1974, Alberta, her father was Adam Daniel Williams. Now, you know, Martin Luther King's brother was named A.D. after their grandfather, Adam Daniel. Adam was the survivor. He had a sister, Adam and Eve. Eve was his sister. He was the survivor. That's the grandfather who was a minister. He was a minister of Ebenezer Baptist Church. That's why he's in the stained glass early on. Adam Daniel's father, Willis, was born into enslavement. Willis Williams and his mother was Lucretia Williams, 30-year age difference between them. That's a whole nother story. Willis Williams is the first minister in the family. Willis Williams, father of Adam Daniel Williams, father of Alberta Christine Williams, who marries Michael King, becomes Martin Luther King. That's all the ministers. All the ministers came through his mother's line. It's important to understand that, because we often think in terms of, you know, how these things operate. We don't think about, but the reason I'm mentioning that is that Martin Luther King's grandfather, A.D. Williams, who died in the house that Martin Luther King was born in, because that was their house. A.D. and Jenny bought that house that Martin Luther King family, you know, was raised in. A.D. Williams was a close confidant, and he was part of the leadership that came out of Reconstruction and built out the force that becomes early Black politics in Georgia. A.D. Williams was a co-founder of the Georgia Equal Rights League. It's another, and then my man James Morgan, who is one of the leading scholars on a lot of this stuff, including Masonic history. I love that young brother. That's my man. You know, he really tell you about it. He was very close friends with Henry McNeil Turner. And so all these, when I look at a Raphael Warnock, without getting too deep, in fact, yeah, I'm thinking about, anyway, I'll talk about that another day. There's a lot of stuff on Henry McNeil Turner that's been published before. Edwin Redkey, Respect Black, but now my man Andre Johnson out of the University of Memphis has a whole shelf of books on Henry McNeil Turner. A lot of his original writings. He's continuing to produce stuff. Look into Henry McNeil Turner. They have a website actually where a lot of this stuff has been posted, primary documents. But when I see a Raphael Warnock, I'm not looking at the dawn of a new day in Georgia that has no precedent. To look at a Raphael, if you yank on Raphael Warnock and take Black politics out, it's going to lead you back through, of course, Maynard Jackson and them. But if you yank on Maynard Jackson too hard, you're going to see John Wesley Dodds and them fall out. And that becomes the generation of Martin Luther King Sr., then A.D. Williams. And before you know it, you're back at Reconstruction when Henry McNeil Turner and them came and they won the elections, and them same hillbilly horde, their great grands, came and said they invalidating the elections because too many Negroes ran. And so when you think of the history of Reconstruction, what we're seeing in 2021, we saw it before in the 1860s and 70s. This is the Reconstruction thing where they sabotaged the Reconstruction governments and they threw out Henry Turner, who had been elected to the Georgia State Legislature. And this ain't 2021 where you can organize and come back and get the, you know, let's win this. Henry Turner was out. Henry Turner said on this right there in Atlanta, Henry Neal Turner, who was cast out of his seat, Henry Turner said, God himself would not come from heaven and pass judgment on my manhood. So what makes you think that I would let any of you buckra do so? Buckra is one of them words like for cracker, peckerwood. You know the words that your grandparents use when they're not in polite company. But at any rate, except he made this public statement. Now, cats now talking about, this ain't this is our grandparents' civil rights movement. You better go back and study, because I don't know which one of us is trill enough to do that when nobody got their back in the middle of the Klan rally. So, but I'm saying that to say that Raphael Warnock seems to me has 24 months. We talked about this before, because he's coming up for a rematch in 2024, because he's finishing a term. Do we see Kelly Loeffler again? Remember what she did? She backed out. She kept her powder dry. I came here prepared to vote to say invalidate Georgia, but I've reconsidered. Kelly Loeffler, see the way it's going. The hillbilly horde got her shook, and she backed up out of it. Does she run again? Doug Collins, he gonna run for governor probably, so maybe he didn't run for Senate. That fool. But I'm saying, but there's going to be a white nationalist challenge for that seat, and so it seems to me that Warnock, one strategy he could pursue, and I'm not saying which one he should or shouldn't pursue, because again, all politicians, we got to use like what they are, tools. Warnock, seems to me, could become or aspire to become tapping into that Ebenezer pulpit, which means Martin Luther King Jr., which means Martin Luther King Sr., which means Alberta Williams, which means Willis and Creasy, which means A.D. and Jenny Parks Williams, which means John Wesley Dodds, which means black political power in Georgia and Atlanta. Tap into that whole momentum, and every Sunday you stand in that pulpit like a remix and improvement on Adam Clayton Powell. And then Monday through Friday, you're in Washington proposing legislation, tying it to your sermon message, continuing to organize. Show us, instead of the rhetorical King Day speeches about how we must call this country. Nah, dude. Preach your sermon about the poor. Preach that sermon on the Mount, and then say, and as you all saw last week in the bill that I co-sponsored, we must now go further than even the president has proposed in terms of SNAP benefits. And when we go into the next round of budget reconciliation, because I understand President Biden, Mr. Schumer, you do not want to break the filibuster, but we have budget reconciliation. And I'm not talking about the kind of reconciliation that tells us to beat our swords into plowshares. I'm talking about the type of reconciliation that Chairman Sanders of the Budget Committee is engaged in now to give us another $30 billion in SNAP benefits, because Jesus said, remember what you have done unto the least of these, you have done unto myself. And preach your sermon and make it policy. You got 24 months, bro. And so if you don't do that, if you follow the failed Democratic policy of triangulation, chasing them phantom white voters, you're going to set it up so that in 2 years, the Democrats, and I'm not talking about being a hoopster for the Democrat. Anybody who thinks that I'm a cheerleader for the Democrat has not been listening, haven't been paying attention. Man, they've been calling me all kind of stuff. Dashiki, Democrat. And I love it, though, because, my mom used to say, you open your mouth, put your brain on display. It's like you clearly not paying attention. But if in 2 years, if they don't pursue a different kind of strategy, the white nationalists have realized that they can't win anymore with that fragile coalition. So what they're moving now to do, and what we've seen over the last week, as we both have seen, all of us have seen, they're trying now to act like the last 4 years didn't happen without saying it like that, hoping to keep that white nationalist, quote unquote, Trump core and bring back the people who don't mind white nationalism at all and who are they just don't want you to say it out loud. That's why when you read where do we go from here? Yeah. Martin King said the worst white people are the white liberals. So Dr. King, so Raphael, Brother Warnock, Senator Warnock, tap into your Martin Luther King. Confront the white liberals, the lukewarm, Now, when they say something about spitting stuff out of your mouth, I ain't gonna get into the theology because it's not my you ain't out of my. But I mean, if one is serious now, there's a path, but I don't know that he would take a path like that, Professor Hunter. I don't know that he would.
We shall see.
Yeah.
And we shall remember.
Oh, we're gonna remember because that's what they're working on now. They ain't never going to forget. They are already trying to triangle. I know there's a couple of things. Let me mention this because on the Lift Every Voice and Sing. For those of you, I mean, we heard what. Well, pause. We were, early in the week, a thought came to you. We hit me a text. Hey, maybe we should talk a little bit about Lift Every Voice and Sing on Saturday. Why did that come to your mind, Professor Hunter? Do you remember?
Yeah. Was it Claiborne?
Oh, yeah, Jim Clyburn. Yes.
Clyburn. I'm sorry. The one that got Biden elected.
How about that?
Wanted to replace the Star Spangled Banner with the Black National Anthem, and I lost my mind. For a brief period, I blacked out for just a second. I was absolutely not, Clyburn. Absolutely. That he even uttered that publicly. So I just wanted to know what you thought about. I'm like, only the road we tried. Hell, no, y'all don't get that. I'm sorry.
You weren't on that road, right? No. You know what? And I'll be very delicate here.
Why?
Well, because there's a saying, particularly in Black nationalist circles, that in Pan-Africanist circles, that every old person not an elder. But in the case of Jim Clyburn, I'm raised in the South. There's a certain level of respect.
Okay, yeah.
We can disagree.
We should be respectful anyway.
No, we are being respectful. Right, we should be respectful anyway. Right. That's our humanity. But at the same time, we shouldn't be stupid. That's a dumb idea from an elder who has earned the right to talk and say dumb stuff. Because it's like every other elder we have in our families or communities that talk crazy. You bring them a plate or put a blanket over them. Say, all right, pop. It's good. It's okay. It's okay. You don't. No, this is clearly but here's the thing: in terms of heart of different ages, Jim Clyburn been talking like that since he was in South Carolina. If you listen very closely to the eulogy he gave for John Lewis at Lewis's funeral, Clyburn was from the kind of moderate-ish wing of the youth movement, the civil rights movement. But without getting too deep into the politics of Jim Clyburn, who's an old social studies teacher, and without beating him up too much about it, let's go to the videotape. My friend, a sister who you've had conversations with and broadcast, Imani Perry at I'm thinking about Princeton. Yeah, Princeton. I got black colleges on my mind. They forwarded in my mind already. But Imani wrote a book a couple of years ago called May We Forever Stand, A History of the Black National Anthem. It's an excellent book. I encourage everyone to get it. She kind of walks through the origins of the book. And of course, she starts where everyone has to start. And I thought I saw something Imani said the other day, said, said, I don't agree with Clyburn, but, I understand, and of course, again, her people, she born in Alabama. She never wasn't raised there, but I mean, her mom and people, Alabamans. So my mom's from Alabama. So, a certain protocol, right? Home training is called it. But what did the man who wrote it say? This is James Weldon Johnson. This is his biography. Get this. Along This Way. The autobiography of James Weldon Johnson. This brother, this is what James Weldon Johnson said when they said, well, the Star Spangled Banner is an anthem and Lift Your Voice and Sing is an anthem. He said, no. James Weldon Johnson, the author of the so-called Black National Anthem, said, when you hear the Star Spangled Banner with all that killing and all that, blood, he said, it sounds like a drinking song. Now, remember, James Weldon Johnson was a poet. You understand? It's badly written. It's like a drinking song. Lift Every Voice and Sing, it's much more noble. That's a hymn. So when Jim Clyburn says that, let's make this the national hymn. You know what? This is how I might approach it if I were talking to him. I said, I tell you what, Congressman Clyburn, I will support that 100% when you let all of us know two things. Number one, the difference between a hymn and an anthem. And I know you know it because you didn't say national anthem, you said national hymn. Number one, difference between a hymn and an anthem. And number two, whether or not we pray to the same God in the United States of America. You answer those two questions satisfactorily, I'm with you. You know why it can't be no national hymn? Because ain't no national God for two reasons. One, you claim that you separate church from state, even though we know that's a lie. You know, read Pauline Mayer's book, American Scripture, any of this stuff. You know, we know what y'all do. God's not mentioned in the Constitution, but it's mentioned in the Declaration of Independence and the Pledge of Allegiance and on the money. And by God, I know that's that God y'all worship, the one that y'all hold up in the hillbilly horde when you came down. It ain't no God we worship. But at any rate, a hymn is different. And so that's what Weldon Johnson. But here's the thing I love about this, Karen. For those of you, when you get this book, go to page 154. No, I'm sorry. Go to page 152. James Weldon Johnson, born in Jacksonville, Florida, 1871. His brother Rosemond, 2 years younger than him, John Rosemond Johnson, went by Rosemond his whole life, born 1873. So they born right after the end of enslavement. They're born in Jacksonville. Their mama's from the Bahamas. The Johnson brothers evolve into two very powerful cultural workers. James Weldon Johnson's a hell of a poet. He's a man of letters. In fact, get his autobiography, the autobiography of an ex-colored man. Well, that's the piece he wrote. He means kind of a thinly veiled. It's very interesting. But anyway, Along This Way is the one you should start with. And you see the history of his parents, the history of Jacksonville, which had a public school system very early on, which is one reason why Imani and them think maybe that's why they moved down there, and so forth and so on. Anyway, it takes out of a 400-page book, it takes about to page 152 where you get to why they wrote this song. Here's the thing. Because the brother Rosemond becomes a major songwriter in Tin Pan Alley, Black Tin Pan Alley in New York. These cats is cosmopolitan. He making money. Rosemond Johnson was a dude who was making money as a songwriter. They come along around the same time of another Bahamian by way of California, Egbert Williams. Burt Williams. This is the minstrel show crowd. These are the people who, UB Blake and them. I mean, these guys are hitting their stride or have already been established in this age where Black people are becoming culture. Think about, it's not the same, but it's close enough for young people to think about this. Think about Bad Boy. Think about Def Jam, except don't think about it in 1980s, 1990s. Think about 1900. So they making money in popular songs. So they write ditties and things that are kind of cute, right? Watch this. So they are they making money. So he's in New York with his brother. He writes about how they making money, they doing these things. He says, when I got back to Jacksonville, I found that my artistic ideas and plans were undergoing a revolution. He says, frankly, I was floundering badly. The things that I'd been trying to do seemed vapid and non-essential. And the thing I felt a yearning to do was so nebulous that I couldn't take hold of it or even quite make it out. In this state, satisfactory expression first came through the writing of a short dialect poem. One night, just after I'd finished the poem, I was at Mr. McBee's house talking about school matters, about books and literature. He read a long poem he had written on Lincoln, a Lincoln poem, the expression of a Southern white man. I thought it was good and told him so. I also thought, but I did not say, that there was yet to be written a great poem on Lincoln, the expression of a Negro. Aloud, I repeated for him my dialect poem, Since You Went Away. He thought it was good enough for me to try it, send it to one of the most important magazines. I sent it to Century, and it was promptly accepted and printed. And he said, outside of what he had done at Atlanta University, where he went to school with Walter White and them cats, he said nothing of his had ever been printed in a magazine like that. So they printed it. That poem, Since You Went Away, his brother wrote music to it, and it was eventually it was recorded. He said it was first sung by Amato, the Metropolitan Opera baritone. It was after it was recorded for the phonograph by John McCormick with a violin obligato played by Chrysler, and it was again recorded by Louis Gravier and still again by Paul Robeson. It continues to find a place on concert programs. Look up Since You Went Away on YouTube if you want. You'll see you can hear Paul Robeson singing this James Weldon Johnson poem. But then during the winter, he writes some more dialect poems. He's back and forth between New York. And here we go. He says, a group of young men decided to hold on February 12th, 1900, a celebration of Lincoln's birthday. I was put down for an address, which I began preparing. But I want to do something else also. Remember now, he's saying my creative juices ain't flowing. So I'm writing these little dialect poems that my brother turns into songs. We making this money. But what I want to say, I can't get out of my breast. It's just in there. And I feel like I'm in a creative rut. Watch this. My thoughts began buzzing around a central idea of writing a poem on Lincoln. Remember, he said, ain't been no great one written by a Negro. He says, but I couldn't net those thoughts. I couldn't get those thoughts together. So I gave up the project as beyond me. At any rate, beyond me to carry out in so short a time. And my poem on Lincoln is still to be written. Now, he publishes along this way in the 1930s. So there's 30 years after this. And mind you, Monty talks about this as well in her book. People used to ask James Weldon Johnson, how did you write Lift Your Voice and Sing? And he'd tell the same story with slight variations, but this is the one for the record, right? So he says, my central idea, however, took on another form. Because he's saying we're going to have this Lincoln thing, and then we're going to go, and then we're going to, but wait, February when? The 12th? I ain't got no time to really write. No, I'll get that up. But I want to do something. I'm in this rut. So watch this. He says, I talked it over with my brother. I talked over the thought I had in mind, and we planned to write a song to be sung as part of the exercises. We planned, better still, to have it sung by school children, a chorus of 500 voices. Now, mind you, Monty writes about this as well. She's got a whole chapter on all the black schools. Maya Angelou writes about it. If you ever read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, Ralph Ellison writes about it. everybody, this is a song. This is the song that begins to be singing all the black schools. K-12. Martin Luther King grew up singing this. The man put it in his 15-year-old award-winning oratory. So here we go. He says, I got my first line. Lift every voice and sing. Not a startling line. But I worked along, grinding out the next 5. When near the end of the first stanza, there came to me the lines. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. The spirit of the poem had taken hold of me. I finished the stanza and turned it over to Rosamond. Now, there are accounts that say that Rosamond is in there in the house playing on the piano with the melody that we know now as the song, while Weldon is pacing outside on the porch and up and down the steps trying to think through this. Here's the next. In composing the two other stanzas, I did not use pen and paper. Let's stop right there. Jay-Z going to the studio, he don't have no pen and paper. James Weldon Johnson wrote in the International Anthem, he don't do pen or paper either. He says, I did not use pen and paper. While my brother worked at his musical setting, I paced back and forth on the front porch, repeating the lines over and over to myself, going through all of the agony and ecstasy of creating as I worked through the opening and middle lines of the last stanza. And these are the ones he chose to include. And as far as I'm concerned, when they get to this verse right here, that's why you sing all 3 verses. My favorite verse is that last verse. Weldon Johnson puts in his autobiography, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast led us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path, we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Congressman Clyburn, this has nothing to do with those that captured your ancestors and made them pick that rice in South Carolina, sir. He continues, I could not keep back the tears. Weldon Johnson said, I could not keep back the tears. He ain't got pencil or paper. He said, I could not keep back the tears and made no effort to do so. I was experiencing the transport of the poet's ecstasy. Feverish ecstasy was followed by that contentment, that sense of serene joy, which makes artistic creation the most complete of all human experiences. He goes on to write in that chapter that they did the song and him and Rosemont forgot about it. Remember, this is a quick thing they did on deadline. He out there like, I don't know, man, but I just, you know what, bro? I got that first stanza. You work on that. And I like to imagine in my mind that Rosemont in there hitting that piano and he hits that blue note, boom, boom, and he's out there pacing. He ain't got no paper. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears. And the tears start coming. Bruh, take this. It's done. Look at them. They sang, yay, black guy. It's over. Weldon Johnson says, in the next few years, and then Imani charts it in her book, this thing hits like wildfire. 1919, the NAACP makes it their official song. Weldon Johnson says, I started seeing it everywhere. The school children of Jacksonville kept singing it. Some of them went off to other schools and kept singing it. Within 20 years, the song was being sung in schools and churches and on special occasions throughout the South. They sang it on Emancipation Day. That's always January 1. That was the song. They sang it Juneteenth celebrations. They sang it at school assemblies. Carter Woodson, they got lessons in the Negro History Bulletin. I got all the Negro History Bulletins piled up there in the back. They got lessons teaching school children, go research and talk about what this means to you. James Weldon Johnson said, colored wise, all of them, he says nothing. James Weldon Johnson, by the way, died in an automobile accident in 1938 in Maine. His life was tragically cut short. He had a chair at Fisk. He was a professor at Fisk at that time. This is 5 years before he died. He said, nothing that I have done has paid me back so fully in satisfaction as being the part creator of this song. I am always thrilled deeply when I hear it sung by Negro children. I am lifted up on their voices, and I am also carried back and enabled to live through again the exquisite emotions I felt at the birth of the song. My brother and I, in talking, and I'll end here, have often marveled at the results that followed what we considered an incidental effort, an effort made under stress and with no intention other than to meet the needs of a particular moment. The only comment we can make is that we wrote better than we knew. No, Congressman, no, you're not going to match this to Francis Key in the hold of a British ship, praying for the Americans to win, as enslaved Africans, as Gerald Horne reminds us, are trying to swim to that same ship to escape because they are against you, you racist. You go to hell. Keep your anthem. We got a hymn. And no, Congressman, that is not the American hymn. James Weldon Johnson had told you what it is, bro. Anyway, I'll stop there.
This is America.
Ain't it?
Yeah. There's a glee and a joy when we come together in these spaces, and a calm and a peace. I just want to make that because the possibilities are endless. And as I look at the room of people in the comments, because I got one eye here, I'm multitasking. Don't let them tell you can be a jack of all trades and a master of none.
Right.
Don't let them tell you that. We are Africans.
We are Africans.
We can master it all.
Come on.
So I just want to thank you for that. Every day I listen to you in different ways on different platforms, and I'm reminded that we can do all things. So
we have to. Well, I look at you, what you built. I can't thank you enough.
Speaking of that, over the next couple of weeks, and you and I have been in conversation about this, we are going to, we are in the midst of building a platform. So let me just publicly thank the team. Thank you, Kareem. Thank you, Carl, Urias, and Donica. Thank you, all of the folks that are literally right now annotating and dropping the books. This is a very special platform. It is a learning platform.
Yes.
So all the folks asking about donations, and we're grateful for, the comments and the cash apps and the money, but hold on to your money. Hold on to your money. I get it. Y'all don't want YouTube to get a part of it. We are building a space for us where all of the books, somebody said, can you put the books up? I've been doing it, but I'm going to do it in a way that now makes it make sense in a space.
And we got to add, I should have put this. This is Lift Every Voice and Sing. Sandra Catherine Johnson is the executor of the James Weldon Johnson Papers. I'm just dropping it because this is another one you should get. This is a book where she asks, and Julian Bond wrote the foreword, they ask 100 different Black people what that song means to them. So I just wanted to mention, and Lift Every Voice and Sing is probably one of the most written about books in children's books literature. I know a lot of y'all, if you go get those children, I can't even page through them. I should say this right quick, Karen. I'm sorry. No, I should just page, as I page through them, some of the children's books that Lift Every Voice and Sing has been adapted to will bring tears to your eyes, because they go line for line, say lift every voice, and then you'll see a picture of the artist conceiving that. Tell her, and then when you get to that, God of our weary years, you page it. It may be a Black woman on her knees scrubbing the floor. I mean, it's like, no, y'all don't get that. South Africa messed up because they took Kosi Sikelele Africa. That's a whole story for another day. And they, in order to reconcile with the white South Africans, they created a new national anthem. And most of it, so Kosi Sikelele Africa, Malupagani so Pandowayo, God bless Africa. God bless the people. God bless the land. Nkosi, thank you, God. Thank you. God bless Africa. That's the hint. But then, midway through, you hear The old South African anthem. In South Africa, land. Anthems about bombs and war and shit. You can't put it, jam it in it together. The best, you can't.
And just to put a fine point on that, there is no reconciliation.
No.
With anything born in hatred,
come on,
destruction, and death. We cannot reconcile with this. There's no healing.
No healing.
There's no healing. We're gonna have to create a new thing.
That's right.
Where else?
You took us all the way back. You took us all the way. In fact, you mentioned this. You took us all the way back to where we started, Karen, when you said, Dr. King and them, I fear I'm integrating my people into a burning house. Some stuff got to burn. And I know you mentioned one other thing too, sis. United States versus Dustin Higgs, the Supreme Court yesterday.
Oh, I wanted to read that Sotomayor piece.
Yeah,
I wanted to read her whole dissent, but I'm looking at the time too.
And I'm looking at time. But I only mentioned it to say that what Sotomayor is doing right now is what Ruth Bader Ginsburg did. And I'm not a Ruth Bader Ginsburg fan on a couple of points. On other things, I am. But Sotomayor is doing in dissent what you have to do in terms of the law, to put a place marker down for the day you can make that the majority opinion. And she absolutely tapped into some, although she's losing legal stuff. I mean, really, what was the state? They have put more people to death in this administration in the last few months than they have in the
last 6 decades. And she names and lists every single person who was killed by Trump's government.
That's right.
Executed, including a black man today.
That's right. That's right. And so, I'm only mentioning it because, and like you said, because you brought it up, and also to tie it together to what you just said in terms of this question of spirituality. Any lawyer will tell you, particularly folks who have worked in the federal courts. So, one of my best former students, brilliant sister Angela Porter, who's in Minnesota, who clerked for 2 federal judges. She'll be quick to tell you, if you don't know how the death penalty stuff works, don't get in it in terms of, don't get caught up in, what the person did or what they didn't do. Well, they murdered somebody, said, no, you got it. When you approach it through the law, you have to understand that there are certain ways that you can and can't put people to death if you're following the law. What Sotomayor is writing about in dissent is they have thrown all those rules out. And when they can't win at the district court level, because the DC Court of Appeals stopped it. It stopped one of the executions. If they can't win at the Court of Appeals level, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals was going to sit en banc, meaning all of them going to sit determined. If they don't think they can win, they are now appealing directly to the Supreme Court because they have the numbers. This is why, elections, if you don't know how the courts work, do not talk about it. Or at least say, I don't know enough to talk about it. Because see, what we're seeing now, this is what happens when you have federal appointments at every level, district, Court of Appeals, and it was the Fourth Circuit, which was the last one that Trump and them flipped with their appointees, were the ones that said, go ahead and kill them in this last couple of examples. Anyway, go ahead.
Give them the thumbs up. Nearly 4,000 people in this room.
Yes.
Thumbs up. We're going to mess with these algorithms here on YouTube till we, as we build, because 2 things can be true and they should be. We should be everywhere we want to be. We should be. Also, for folks who, Carr names a lot of names. We are here to remember every name he drops will be cataloged, and we'll have an annotation, and we'll have a link, because we got to unearth the people and their connections. So you are tying threads literally to sew up our history. And I appreciate every name you drop, because as I'm going back through every video, and I get why people watch it 2 and 3 times, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm now going down different rabbit holes because you're mentioning a name that just sparks my imagination. So I want to thank you for that. So if you don't have the patience to go through the names, that's on you. Just close your ears, shut your mouth, put the straw in the mouth. For some of us, every name you drop means something, because you're not just dropping them just to name people. You
no.
For the purpose.
And I'm leaving most of the names out. That's the thing.
Right. And if we don't reclaim our history through this process, no one else is going to do it. So stop complaining. So I just want to say that. And somebody had a question about the stained glass in Martin Luther King's church
in Ebenezer.
Ebenezer, that there's a white Jesus in that stained glass.
Oh, yeah.
And there's white Jesus in a lot of our churches. When you know better, you do better.
Yeah. Yeah. We grew up with them, no question.
And I think that was it. So we have questions from folk. So you ready?
Oh, yes.
Okay. All right. Let me welcome in Mr. Samba, who is originally from Senegal, coming to us from New York. Hi, Samba.
Hey, Baba, how you doing?
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, the home of Shake Out
Hi,
the Joke.
Professor Hen.
Man.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Actually, I lived right next to Professor Babakar Sal. I know.
Oh,
I heard you
Babakar Sal,
mention him. Yes.
Abu Bakr Musalam and Babakar Sal. These are the disciples of Shake Out the Joke. Really?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I'm a fan.
Thank you. Why are you saying Wolof Nangadef? No, Nangadef.
Yeah. That is our lingua franca. But I'm
I had
sorry.
a question. Senegal is the largest port of Africans into America. That's one of the greatest ports from Africa to the New World. Senegal.
You mean like from Gore? Is that what you're talking about? Or
is that the largest?
I think it's smaller than a port that we have or they built in Ghana.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, yeah, but it is one of the major ones.
But Phyllis Wheatley is one of your the family. Yes,
That's right. I like to think that Harriet is from there also. That
no
name,
question.
Araminta is really a name you see back.
Oh, really?
Aram and Aminta.
Really?
So very possibly, yeah.
Is it it's not Wolof, is it Arabic? Wolof, which
possibly, because all these names you have all these
of course
influence, this Arabic influence, because they come very early in Africa, way before the white folks.
What part of Senegal are you from?
I'm from Dakar, born and raised.
You from the city?
Yeah.
The cosmopolitan. You know, I was just going over with one of my young people this exhibition catalog on Amadou Bamba.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, because we were
there you go. That's one of the great icons from Senegal.
Oh man, Amadou Bamba, man. I mean, anyway. So I'm sorry, brother. Yeah. So please, yes. So
yeah. I do have a question. Nothing to do with today's topic, but as you and Professor Hunter tend to say, like how do we free ourselves or who we are to ourselves? Yes. I wonder if you can get there, if we still buy into this concept of people of color, because as long as we do that, we are assuming white is standard and we are the other, and we cannot be the other, can we? We are the original people.
That's right.
I think that's something we have to somehow change. I wonder what you guys think about that.
I agree with you, brother. I agree with you, son. But I mean, I don't use people of color, even as I understand in the American context where it came from. So very quickly, and in fact, Sterling Stuckey is a good source on this in his book Slave Culture. He's got a chapter on this whole quote unquote he calls the names controversy. And then there are others who've written about it. I remember a very good article in the Journal of American Ethnic History. Betty Collier Thomas, my friend Betty Collier Thomas, who's at Temple, and one of our great Babas at James Turner, retired now, living in New York, from Ithaca, New York, Cornell. People of color kind of emerges in the 19th century, early 19th century in the United States as a way for some of the black folk who are working out, trying to figure out liberation movements among the so-called free blacks, as a phrase to use to try to say, we are people just like you. In other words, it's almost like an abolitionist platform kind of thing. You need to stop treating us differently. We see it again prominently. There are other places, but cluster around the end of the 19th century. T. Thomas Fortune and other talking about colored people and people like that. Again, with that same logic. And then, of course, by the time we get into the first quarter of the 20th century, we still see it. People of color, colored people, NAACP, the advancement of colored people. The idea is people is our common humanity, and we just people of color or colored people. We also see it in places like Louisiana. I mean, that's a whole nother thing. Free people of color, which is, there's their color gradations, their class gradations. Who's your mother? Who's your father? Did you come from the French? I mean, and that has a kind of a nastier connotation in some ways. We won't get too deep into that. Anyway, long story short, in 2020, now my assertion, and I agree with you, the normative default position, this is how whiteness maintains its power. It hides behind the normative language. So we say people, and then people say, well, what about people of color? No, you just reinforce whiteness because you assume people means white people. So when people say people of color, I very quickly say non-whites. And I don't even think that's the best language. Maybe the best, but
I think Frances Cress Welsing, the global majority, and I don't know if she coined that, but it resonated with me, the global majority, because it puts on its ass this notion that we're minorities.
Yes.
And that minority thing is on purpose. So as soon as you say, nope, global majority,
They got problems.
A big problem.
Look, Dr. King, where do we go from here? Chapter 6, the world house. Dr. King is like, we're the majority. He was saying that in 57. If we had gone on in that Ghana speech, both of the ones he gave, he said, we're the majority. That's exactly right. So, but people try to shrink King. I have a dream where you will be this. Dr. King was colorblind. You clearly haven't read a word of Dr. King. Dr. King, like Samba, like what you said, Karen, in naming the global majority, Dr. King, in fact, this is what he says often. He says, Black people in America, we are citizens of the world. And as we embrace our world humanity, he says it's in 57 at that prayer breakfast in Lincoln Memorial. As we embrace our world humanity, we understand that the sins of colonialism and imperialism and the sins of what is happening to Black people in the United States, the Negro in the United States, are the same sins. That comes into the ear very differently than, I have a dream of little Black children and white children. Nah, y'all stop editing Martin King. King was clear on this. And don't act like he just got clear on it the last 2 years of his life. He's been thinking like that since he was a teenage boy and probably before. So Samba, no, people of color. And when people say it, we get in these conversations, people are still going to use people of color. You can't make people do nothing. But I know, the beautiful thing I like about this, Karen, you say this a lot, we both do, and we all know this. We just keep trying to pour a clean glass of water. Don't get no arguments. People will come to it.
Indoctrination is so hard to break.
I
struggle with it too, and I slip up every now and then, but it's practice. It's practice. We're not black. Black is a comparative designation that always puts white at the top of the food chain. Malcolm said that, right, when he was reading the dictionary. So we're not black either. We're the global majority.
Men,
human. The founders of humanity. We could do that. The birth of humanity.
That's right.
Want to get nasty with it.
That's right. Oh, and I should mention this too. It isn't just who we would think that would be trying to steer us in a certain way to think about how these conversations were going on. Going back to One Night in Miami, whether it be Martin and Malcolm. Here's a little pamphlet called King, Malcolm, and Baldwin. Kenneth Clark in these questions he's asking Martin Luther King and them. And if y'all really want to get into it, after Dr. King was killed, the Ford Foundation, some more people gave them some money. By the way, shout out to Dr. Alondra Nelson, Sister Alondra Nelson. This sister who late from Columbia, on the faculty of Columbia, brilliant scholar of race. She wrote a whole book on the social life of DNA. I mean, brilliant scientist. She was over the Social Sciences Research Council. She still is, but she is transitioning now. She's going to be one of the senior deputies dealing with science in the Biden-Harris administration. That's a Black woman who is a whole beast. So I just thought about it because, these foundations, Elizabeth Alexander now, you get Ford Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, they give out money for people to do work. The Ford Foundation, and there's a whole series of books that deal with this. Here's one right here called Top Down, the Ford Foundation, Black Power and the Reinvention of Racial Liberalism, Karen Ferguson. After Dr. King was killed, the government, private industry, they say, look, we can't let these Negroes just come out with this Black power stuff. We got to be able to shape some of this. So they go talk to some Black people and these Black intellectuals, some of them, and say, how can we get that? Because, this ain't the first time we've had Black spokespeople that we didn't pick, that people just elevate and put out. There's a book called The Haverford Discussions, a Black integrationist manifesto for racial justice. You see the names, Kenneth Phipps Clark, St. Clair Drake, Ralph Ellison, John Hope Franklin, all these people. Maybe Kenneth Clark is in there. Kenneth Clark is asking King, what you think about Malcolm? I mean, this separatism stuff. And he's calling you this, that the King's like, well, I don't know. It's more complicated than that. Then he comes in and asks Malcolm, what you think about Dr. King? Then he said, yeah, I don't think Dr. King's strategy is right. I think, these people just going to beat the hell out of you. You can't, what did you get out of Montgomery but the right to go eat a sandwich at the Crackers store, and he still owned the store. Then he's asking Baldwin. I'm like, dude, I respect Kenneth Clark. Kenneth Clark, Mamie Clark, the Dahl test, and Brown versus Board. But be very clear, it ain't just white people who, by locking us into this idea of Black-white binaries and America and the domestic agenda, lead us off the path. King and them were always bigger than the United States. So, when you see little things like this, always be reminded that anybody telling you that we're not citizens of the world, that we are not the global majority, that we should focus on here exclusively, that's somebody who has a lot more work to do. And some of them have an agenda.
I was going to say, or somebody's paying them.
Paying them well, no question.
All right, let's welcome Josie. Josie is coming in her car. Not
Hey,
sure
Josie.
where in the world Josie is.
Hello.
Hi,
Hey.
Josie.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can hear you.
I
Oh,
like that
awesome.
framing. I like that up through the frame. That's pretty cool.
So, I had to bring my mother to get her vaccine. She's 89 and I'm her caretaker. So I'm in the car outside the car.
Yes.
God bless.
Is she in? She's in there now.
She's in the clinic. And I
Go,
hope
Mom.
I thought you could meet her because my mother's 89. We're from St. Vincent in the Caribbean. And my mother trained us as little people to go to the market square for political discussions. And my mother has been marching. In fact, the George Floyd marches in Newark
Yes.
with POP, with People's Organization for Progress.
Oh, of course.
She was out there at 88 with her mask, with her eye, and with me with a beach chair. But my mother says, her position is you got to be counted. You got to show up.
Yes.
And you can't wait too late to be counted and too late to show up.
Yes.
So,
goodness.
so that's, we would have been at the MLK march with Larry Ham today, but we had to come and do her vaccine.
Oh, Larry Ham. Listen, the People's Organization for Progress. I remember at Baba Amiri's funeral at Amiri Baraka. POP, man, y'all are legends. This is what I'm saying.
Well, listen, I was actually Larry's Ham press writer for his Senate campaign. Larry's a fierce brother, and
yes.
And we're I'm helping some young people to do what we call a popcast to create activism in a new generation. Larry is alive, and Larry will continue to be alive, and so many others. Baba Zaid. So many others. Yeah.
Thank you, Josie, for this work. That's so important. I have to, I remind my man, Todd Stephen Burrows, who teaches at Seton Hall, who's been, working for many years with Pop. Yeah. I mean, that just reminds me of him. Thank you so much for that continued struggle and that continued work in Newark.
Well, Todd is a friend, and actually Todd put us in touch. I'm the one in the email.
Yes. Okay, it's good to see you. Yes.
I'm the one. I am so, I'm from the Caribbean, and so when I engage in work in America, I engage in work from a Pan-Africanist perspective. And so when you started the conversation today, I have so many questions, and I have so many questions every week for you guys, but I just take my notes, and like everyone else, I'm taking my notes and getting my books. And so so I want to go into my question, and let me just say, I share your links with all of my people back in St. Vincent.
Oh, that's
because we, I come out of a political organizing movement in St. Vincent. This is Maurice Bishop era.
Oh,
this is that whole. So I'm part of that generation, and my cousin, actually, Ralph Gonsalves, is the prime minister. He's my cousin.
That was the name. When I think of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I think about wow.
Yeah, that's my cousin, and so I come out of that tradition and being raised in that. And I got Frantz Fanon's book Black Skin White Mask when I was 9 from my brother, who was smuggling papers from out of the Iron Curtain into St. Vincent. So we come into this space from a Pan-Africanist perspective, and we come into, and the work that I do in here, when I do work on social justice, what I say to folks is, I don't do work around racial equity. I do work around Black liberation.
I know that's right.
And your Blackness is not my Africanness. Come on. And I say that to young people.
Yes.
And by the way, I came up with that particular mantra based on you and Professor Hunter. Really? So it's just of recent, I say to people, your Blackness is not my Africanness.
Oh, no, that's, what's so funny? I think you all have demonstrated that to us out of the Caribbean. In fact, I have a very good friend, Seal Daniel, who is, she went to school in, I guess, Montreal. I know the Canadian link. It was.
We have a lot of that. Yes, we do.
I forget the name of the school now that the students, mostly from the Caribbean, took over. And they broke into the computer room, and I have the books here somewhere. But anyway, but with all due respect and gratitude for the fact that language has emerged, and you kind of taken it and moved, sounds like you've been doing this since you were a little girl. You were going to you sound like some Walter Rodney kind of stuff, y'all.
So Walter Rodney and Fanon are books, because I have, my siblings are 15 years my senior.
Aha.
And my uncle was a leader in the Black liberation in the 70s when you had Black liberation movements. So my uncle Stanley, right? Yeah. So
wow.
we were raised sort of like in that space. And by the way, you engage in your work and your life from a political construct that drives you to liberation.
No question.
And so it brings me to sort of one of my 100 million questions for you and Professor Hunter. And the one today, because I like the way you started off class today. Tim Snyder from the New York Times did a piece called The Abyss.
Yes.
And when he frames, brilliant piece, right?
Yeah.
And so he frames the insurrectionists as breakers for the Republican Party. And he talks about the gamers who are the politicians. And I want to expand the gamers, because I see the gamers, which is the challenge we have when you talk about, when Professor Hunter poses a question, how do we move forward? And the idea is the gamers are the white neoliberals and white neoliberalism that not just, and separate from the 74 million we have assumptions around.
That's right.
When you look at the white neoliberal media, and I'm talking about both Black and white people engage in this white neoliberal politics, the idea that somehow we have overcome white supremacy, somehow we've overcome, because you cannot have capitalism without white supremacy, and to break the back of capitalism, you have to break white supremacy.
No question.
So we're not, if we are choosing the path through white neoliberal politics, which a Black elite are, and let me say, brother, forgive me, HBCUs are, we're creating a stratification within public education for Black people by seeing HBCUs being funded by white neoliberals as they cloak their white supremacy and their capitalism. And so the conversation, if we're trying to figure out the Black liberation struggle to the next, as we move through and we have assumptions about what Biden and Harris will do for us, are we ready to see ourselves fully complicit in the insurrection? Because white neoliberalism is fomenting all of this. And so we have assumptions about access, assumptions about power, assumptions about influence. And if we look at this from a Pan-African paradigm, if we look at this through a revolutionary struggle, then we have to accept and come to terms with our complicity, and to understand that white neoliberalism,
very true,
are the gamers,
very true,
of the insurrection.
Let me ask you, Josie. First of all, I agree lockstep with everything you said. In fact, anyone who disagrees, it seems to me, would have to show their work. How did you get to the disagreement point? Because everything is there for us to see. Let me ask you, because it's something I struggle with. And, you and I both, and I'm sure there are many others who are listening to our conversation and thinking, have had fractures with comrades, and particularly the politics of a place like Newark. You know better than I do, than any of us. Going back to the Committee for a Unified Newark and Kenneth Gibson, and coming all the way through to Ras Baraka. When I become the mayor, we become the mayor. Yeah, but there are contradictions and tensions all in that, and fractures. How do you imagine in this real-time, real-world struggle we're engaging in, as we are clear ideologically and increasingly clear as we study and practice, how should we engage electoral politics in your mind? How does that unfold? Because I don't have a clear answer. Again, I've been crucified by some of my ideologically consistent friends that saying, you saying vote for Biden here. I'm like Linda Sarsour, use your best opponent. Now, you heard the $1.9 trillion budget that Biden proposed, which is clearly not enough. But there are people who are about to get evicted that, if Trump was reelected, would be evicted. You know what I'm saying? Now that isn't an excuse, and that isn't a support or endorsement of Biden, Harris, or anybody in that cabinet or anything else. But I'm wondering, and this is why I want to ask you the question, because how should, in your mind, tactically, how do we engage? How do we use electoral politics to pursue our ultimate objectives, even though we run the increasing risk of it backfiring on us? I don't know. Do we just continue to heighten the contradictions? What's your thinking on that?
So, I say to young people, you have to play to lose.
Interesting. Say some more, please. Say some more about that.
And, so, and people are like, what are you talking about? I said, you have to play to lose, meaning you have to push the limits. And this is, something that you and Professor Hunter have talked about. And you sort of raised, right? We've got to look at the patterns of the past to inform
That's true.
the moves of the future, right? And so when I say play to lose, it is about consistency in political education. It is consistency in the way in which we hold not just our politicians accountable, but our academicians and the education structure, because we all live within this educational paradigm. And then the other piece is, how do we begin to reframe liberation through an economic paradigm? The abolition paradigm, right? How do we begin to reframe it through an economic, understanding the economics? And I think this particular window that we've seen Black people saying white supremacy comfortably also allows us a way, right?
How about that? Right.
Listen, I wasn't let into rooms because I would talk about white supremacy.
Oh, wow.
I've been fired because, right? So we have an opportunity to begin to change the discussion around economics, rigorous economics, understanding the way in which, not to separate out white supremacy, but the way in which white supremacy is a function of metadata capitalism, and to understand the way in which we deconstruct metadata capitalism and support, because this is the piece, right? We see ourselves as individuals within, we see ourselves as individual within the marketplace. And so therefore, I live in my house, I do not live in my community. I pay my mortgage, I do not pay the mortgages or the taxes on my neighborhood, so that I live within that construct. And we have lost 2 generations, including my generation. I'm in my mid-50s.
Me too.
We've lost that, our generation and the 2 and generations after, on how we see our role within the liberation movement. We no longer see ourselves and have a discussion about how we move, because when you are an oppressed class, you must design an understanding of how you exist through that paradigm, because you're fighting against an oppressor.
It's true.
And Professor Hunter's on. I must be stopping now.
No, keep talking. I just came on to say how much fire you were delivering today.
That fire, right? And I'm sitting scribbling notes. Go ahead.
You never know where. I mean, this is everything. This is what we talk about, Dr. Carr, behind the scenes. You know, the power that we must have while we both live in these worlds where we are dependent upon people's paychecks to eat.
Yes.
So we talk about this.
So it forces us, and One Night in Miami talks about that. We're still getting paychecks from white people. So I may be rich, but as long as you're getting a paycheck that's tied, and even those HBCUs that were founded by white people, for what purpose exactly? It's still about fostering a white narrative. And it's still not about us being completely, as one gentleman said during One Night in Miami, and I got to go back to it because the conversations were dynamic. Thank you, Regina King. How can we show up Muhammad Ali's character as our full selves and not have to worry about how we're going to eat and survive? But if we start with community, because we've done it before.
There it is.
If we've done it before, we didn't need them. And then they got mad and bombed us and killed us and raped us and, destroyed. They keep getting mad. The goal here is to figure out when white anger happens, which it always will, jealousy and fragility, do we have an answer for it? That's the question.
Yeah.
I'm out.
And so that you're answering, I think, the question posed by Professor Carr, right, to me, which is, so how do we do this? This particular class has inspired me around activism. This class that you and Professor Hunter in. And so I think the replication of the education that gets us to understand, because as an individual in a classroom, I say to Medgar Evers students, I say to them,
you at MEC?
Political theory, right?
Yes.
So I say, I said, you have to understand this. You are getting a degree from a mediocre school, you're getting a mediocre degree. You and by the way, and this is a larger construct in which that is being described, right?
Absolutely.
You are getting a degree in a highly stratified marketplace that Bezos has transformed, that you will not get a job at the cleaners in the neighborhoods where the technicians who work for Amazon live.
How about that?
You will not get a job as a waiter or waitress because the neighborhood, because we're not only economically stratified, we're socially stratified.
Absolutely.
We will no longer cross paths. That is the intersection, what metadata capitalism has done, which is why when I talk about we have to address white neoliberal politics, forget the 74 million.
Oh yeah.
The white neoliberal paradigm that says, I am shocked that there's gambling going on in the White House.
Right.
I am shocked.
Trying to back out.
Right. And now we are going to form alliances with our HBCUs stratification.
Yeah, you see what they're doing now in Atlanta with that Amazon campus. They're gonna. It's reinforces stratification for sure.
Because the majority of Black people who attend public universities are now invisible.
How about that?
Invisible.
Yeah, I mean,
and
interesting.
And so young people have become invisible while they're bought into the idea that a degree is going to get me out. It's going to get me connected. It's going to get me that tech job, right? They become invisible. On top of that, they're also convinced that they're entrepreneurs. Not that you have to have $150,000 liquid cash for being an entrepreneur, but my logo is now my entrepreneurial path.
Right. In fact, I think about Sophia Noble's book, Algorithms of Oppression.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and we're participating in that.
This
is why I think that the idea, and I'd love for us going forward, Hunter and Carr, to talk about metadata capitalism and how we're seeing the patterns of oppression showing up in the new iterations of capitalism, because capitalism is like it reinvents itself.
Oh, no question.
It keeps right, and so we have to look at the patterns and the role that we're playing in those patterns, because as we stratify, we are rendered non-existent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the 1.9 trillion you talk about, will not cover the invisible society.
Or what one at all. I mean, it seems to me that's why I ask you in terms of the political implications. It seems to me that there's an element of guerrilla warfare in play in terms of politics. I mean, the idea, I love this, play to lose. I mean, the idea that if we know we're not going to get the resources, we're not going to be able to seize the resource. At this point, we don't have the critical mass, as you said, the organization, and whether it be very local politics. I mean, when I think of federal politics, I don't think of the savior paradigm, the savior model, because as you said, the Black elite have done quite well, and they will continue to serve a buffer role. I mean, we know that's just classic historical materialism. We know that. I mean, and racial capitalism is going to make it even more obvious. But the idea that the organization work, the teaching and learning work, and Dr. King writes about this. In fact, he talks about the fact that education is critical, it's indispensable, and that it's not enough, that it must be combined with social and economic power. And then he, but that having been said, I think of the federal apparatus in terms of electoral politics as an apparatus that we attempt to not restructure and repurpose, but in kind of a guerrilla style, siphon off resources to the local, to the type of building initiatives. So Medgar Evers is a perfect example, I think. Evers as an institution that's closer to like where I went to undergraduate, Tennessee State, than it would be to a Howard or to a Morehouse. Working class people, 400 College for that matter, folks who are trying to improve their lives, but then who have access to you by virtue of the fact that, and I know that there are many challenges. I was with my friend Tony Brown and one of Karen's colleagues at Hunter, and listening to Brenda Green, Dr. Green, who of course one of your colleagues at talk about this assault Evers is under right now. The question I have is, and I guess I'm trying to figure out is it tactically sound bang on the federal apparatus to try to filter to an Evers or a Tennessee State or a North Carolina A&T. And I'm just thinking now exclusively about these Black colleges or colleges where these people are, even if it's just a sliver of resources, to allow us the liminal kind of temporary space to have access so we can still pay our light bill and eat to these young people, to get to, in other words, it seems to me that this is less a kind of a philosophical debate than it really is a tactical discussion on how do we best gain access to resources that we know are being used to oppress us, to repurpose them. That I don't have a good answer for that. That's why I'm asking.
Oh, okay. Let me unmute Josie.
Sorry.
And no. And people want
the beginning of the conversation, right?
Yeah.
people want to meet your mother, Josie. And Kareem hit me back. Dora, we're gonna have a conversation, you and I and your mom, at some point. This space that we're creating is literally going to be a learning space. It's going to be the new school. And In Class with Carr is foundational. But we're going to be having conversations with Dr. Sophia Noble.
Yes.
You know, the algorithms of was it algorithms of hate?
Of oppression. Yeah.
Of oppression. You mentioned capitalism. Was it you mentioned a couple of things that people wanted you to explain.
Racial capitalism.
Racialized capitalism, metadata capitalism.
Metadata capitalism.
Yeah.
Explain that, please.
And so because we now live in a society of metadata. We run on algorithms. We attract. We are everything. We are a number, and that number gets crunched. So we live in a world where we're constantly being crunched. In the old days, we could live off the grid. Grid has been the grid has been co-opted, and it's also being crunched. We're being monitored. And I give an example to the audience. So the reason that folks were taking selfies last week, they had assumptions that the algorithms of oppression were only being used on non-white designated peoples.
How about that?
That they would not be tracked because they understand the world.
That's right.
Through that paradigm.
That's right.
So they could take selfies, but they wouldn't, because, and they had, they'd seen at Ruby Ridge and in other places that white supremacists had gotten away with what they were doing.
That's right.
And so they could get away with the selfies because their bodies and minds are not surveilled. There's no number crunching.
Have you seen Shoshana Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism? I mean, it's like a one-stop place where she talks.
It's a one-stop place. Yes. And so it is out of that I sort of coined. It's metadata capitalism, right?
Okay, got it.
I call it metadata capitalism because because Bezos has changed the marketplace. He's changed how we work.
No question.
He's changed work. He's changed how we function as employees. He's changed like Ford changed. He's changed who we are in the workplace.
And you see how when Elon Musk and them zoom past him as the richest people, it's the tech billionaires that have now reduced him to he's a peon in the game. And even though he's that's exactly wow.
Yes. And so that's so and so I try to get young, because the idea is when Fanon says every generation or become obscure. The famous
quote. Every generation out of its relative
our generation.
That's right.
It is our generation as well, Professors Carr and Hunter. We have to do that because we'll lose it. Our generation's being lost. So every generation, it is not just the new generation.
It's very true.
It is every generation until you die.
Josie, let me say this is very interesting because I think we may have mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. I'm reading Toby Green's book, Fistful of Shells.
You did. You mentioned that. Yeah.
And it's interesting because what you've said is so important. Think about Karen Fields and her work on racecraft. I mean, the idea that this system of oppression will look like it completely changed shape, but the underlying rhythm remains in place. That oppression and the idea that when we were being snatched out of Africa and taken to the Caribbean, taken to North America, the thing that was being taken out was us. That was the commodity of exchange. And while there were material exchange like cowrie shells or cloth or gold, the hard currencies of the West were being formed, the silver, the gold. And so the thing that we were deprived of, and Toby Green would make the argument, and that's right, I remember now, we talked about this. Toby Green, of course, making the argument that the thing that was being taken out of Africa was that human capital, which is a fungible asset, which is a, you know, you got to keep taking bodies out. And Joseph and Corey, as far as I'm concerned, have done a lot of work about this. But I'm bringing it up to now, thinking as you're talking, this system in reinventing itself, but keeping in place the hierarchy, the stratification, has, it seems now, unveiled slowly a capacity to maintain that system of extracting value while preventing us from being able to acquire value for ourselves. So how do we, for lack of a better term, jailbreak that rhythm that is not just emerging in place, but that began with the literal snatching of our physical bodies centuries ago? Well, it began before that, but it drew us into it, and now has reformed so that our physical bodies are allowed to walk around, as Dr. King said, but our minds are now hardwired into this process where our labor value is still being extracted. But I would ask you this to finally, because your students, less so than the ones that are at a Howard, like you said, because they too have been seduced into this idea that it's going to be all right for them. They're going to be part of that little manager class. But your students and students like the school I went to, or most of the people who don't go to school at all, do you imagine as this process continues that there's going to be a kind of explosion of, for lack of a better term, disposable people? I mean, is this going to be market-based?
Nope. We're going to have to make this a cliffhanger. We're going to have to do a whole lesson on this because we'll be here another hour. I already know you. I see you. And then you're going to find a book, and then you're going to come, and it's going to be another 2 hours. Some of us got stuff to do today. We don't already get it. You're right. Hours and 40 minutes. We got another question to be asked. I blame you, Dr. Josie, but the goodness of this is you're going to come and teach with Dr. Carr.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes, you will be teaching, madam. And finally, I can't let you go because a lot of people are confused by the phrase. I know there was a phrase because Don Lemon, some mediate. I think that's what you call it. They called him an open black person, or he's openly black or something. And that was trending all last night. But
what?
Yeah, it was. But people want to know, Dr. Josie, what is your blackness is not my Africanness? What does that mean?
Oh, interesting.
Oh, that's a so I'm going to try to be quick. Right?
Yes,
and so it's the way in which we codify a blackness, the way it has become a hyper consumer product, the way we consume blackness, the way it's designed by the oppressor for us to consume back to ourselves, for white people to consume.
How about that?
So the message is to white people. Your blackness is not my Africanness.
It's not my Africanness.
All right. I appreciate you. Look for an email from me.
Peace out. Thank you so much. I love you both so much.
Love you, your mom. My mom's 93.
Stay healthy. Stay alive. Liberation.
Yes. Tell your mother hello. Look for an email from me. Okay.
Bye.
All right. Bye. All right, Doc. This is our last caller, or last question asker. Maybe we'll get out before 3. Blood of Jesus. All right.
We will. We're going our lips together.
We welcome Roger from Chicago.
Roger, that's my man.
Carr, what's going on?
Hold on. There's a running joke in the that somebody wants to play a game like who doesn't Dr. Carr know? Because apparently you know everyone, which I think is important. You are the glue. You are the connector of all people in the diaspora. Yes.
No.
All right.
That's just a target on the back. No, this is divine order. You done prayed this into this space, Professor Hunter. Roger, how are you?
Doc, what's going on? I'm good, man.
Hey, man, what's that on your hoodie, man?
That's AfroBlocks. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about.
What's going on?
So yeah, I've been working out here. I'm in California now, in LA. I've been working in tech for like the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Started a bunch of businesses. Just trying to get in the process, building up the ecosystem as well. Getting as much of us in the space as possible. But kind of to go back to the question that you guys were just discussing. I started a startup last year, AfroBlocks, and what we're doing is we're a freelance platform that connects freelancers on the continent to people all over the world. I don't know if you know anything about the freelance economy, but it's a $1.5 trillion market. You know, I want to say over the last 10 years, India and Eastern Europe have dominated. But the issue that has come into play is that in the next 10 years, there's going to be a talent shortage, right? So I know you've seen a lot.
Walk us through that. When you say talent shortage, people without skills, people, I mean, what?
85 million jobs across the globe could possibly go unfilled because populations are going down. Tech jobs. Like
coders,
developers, IT professionals, you know, designers, all across the board, you know, across the board, even the business development side. So what's happening is populations are going down across the globe, except in one place. So I know you've noticed. Exactly.
Have you seen the book guy wrote, and I mentioned it maybe earlier in some called The Scramble for Europe? I mean, the idea that even Europe is going to be overrun by non-white people at some point.
Exactly. So that's the reason I wanted to really hop on and chop it up with you, because I want to get some academic support behind some of these theses I have in terms of the business side. Going back to the shortage, so it's 85 million people, 85 million jobs that can go unfilled. Populations are going down everywhere, except Africa, of course. 60% of the population under the age of 25.
Under 25. And most of that's under 15 or something. It's like insane.
Exactly. So the way I look at it, Doc, I feel like it's an opportunity for someone else in this world to go into Africa, take advantage of you know, the potential and exploit our people again, right? And I say as a Pan-Africanist, as a true Pan-Africanist, right? As a Black American or whatever, American Black, African American, American African.
As Howard French, the writer for New York Times, his book Africa, China, Second Continent. I mean, there's a whole shelf of books.
Right.
They're already there. So let me ask you, Roger, how do you imagine what do you think we should be doing by we? Because again, there's this whole idea that Africa requires external assistance, and you and I both know, and I think probably everybody
not at all.
That the thing Africa needs is the thing Frederick Douglass told white people, Black people need in America. Leave us alone. I mean, because anybody spending time in Africa knows, look, that's where it's at. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, leave these people alone, and they're gonna be fine. In fact, you don't want to get left. Can we come? Yeah. What do you think?
So my co-founder, that's what I want to touch on. My co-founder is from Zimbabwe. He's from Harare. He's actually in Harare now, Brother Tangai Chodo. And this was his thing. You know, I came on. He reached out to me for advice because we worked together in the past with a brother. Karen might know Sinclair Skinner. You know, he was doing some stuff with Big Mari. And I met this brother Tangai, and you know, we chopped it up. But he came to me earlier this year. He's like, "Yeah, I got this idea. I've been hooking my boys up with jobs. It's taking off. Like, you know, do you think there's something to it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course." And I was doing a whole bunch of other stuff at the time. And after a few months, I saw myself diving deeper into it, like, because I saw the problem that was coming ahead over the next 10 years and the opportunity, how it could either be us getting exploited or us, you know, building some tools.
The L with our name on it has already been manufactured, brother. We're gonna take the L unless we do something about it.
Exactly. So the way I see it is, we're all, you know, wherever Black people are in this world, right? We're citizens of the globe. Like, we all have to approach our problems in different spaces. The one thing I see moving a lot here, and I know it doesn't work for everybody, but like, I see a lot of push towards entrepreneurship on our side, you know, building businesses, building ecosystems. And the cheat code for a lot of people in the tech space over the last 10 years has been to hire offshore talent to kind of build their back ends and things like that. So we're making that connection right now with our people here in the States. If you got a business, whether it's a small mom and pop shop or it's a startup, and you know, it's just you or you and two people, and you don't have a designer or you don't have a software developer, we can walk you through that process and get it done affordably. Like, we never say it's cheap or anything like that, because our brothers and sisters, they got the same talent. They just live in a space where you know, the cost of living is a little lower, so they can, you know, adjust their rates.
So now to what purpose beyond the assistance?
That's kind of the question, right? Like, the commercial part of it, the building and whatever, you know, we got to play that part of the game.
That's fairly straightforward. Yeah, I see that. But now, where do you imagine that then? Let's assume that not only is that level of network level of access achieved, but it supersedes even our wildest imagination.
Yeah.
What would then be the result of that?
The result of it would be that anybody in the next 10 years, 2030, when Google, Amazon, and any of these, Alibaba, any of these other companies start calling.
And I'm glad you said Alibaba, because people in the United States think Amazon is it.
Nah, there's an infrastructure. So here are the problems right now.
Wait, I'm calling for what? To buy?
To work, because they're going to come. They're going to come for talent. They're going to need people to do these jobs. They're going to need people to fill these roles.
This isn't about independence then.
No, let me jump in.
This is about control.
Please, Karen, because you do the Tech Tuesday.
No, I mean, for the last 6 years, I started off actually with a Tech Tuesday on the KarenHunterShow.
Yes.
Because Prince, before he died, was trying to get 1 million kids to learn, Black boys to be exact, to learn how to code, and he was working with Van Jones. It never ended up happening. Prince died, of course, and Van Jones, moved on to other things. That said, it was my commitment to make sure that I know about this millions and millions of unmanned jobs, which is why he wanted to get 1 million kids, Black kids in the hood, to learn how to code, because those jobs are going to be there. So I've been on this mission. Sinclair Skinner, I love blackpeople.com, Howard graduate, engineer, Zimbabwe, and also, Dominican Republic. Black man from Howard. We have a brother named Dele Atande from London, Africa. There are so many people involved in this. So the challenge, and I want to tie this up because we won't be able to answer this question on this class, Roger. What we must do is build that infrastructure that you're talking about, because you're right. Ghana and Nigeria alone have more young Black people under the age of 18 than any other place in the world, and they're smart, they speak English, and we need that capital. It won't be transatlantic slave trade again, not on my watch.
Exactly. That's the point I'm getting at, and I think, Doc, what I'm saying is those people are going to come regardless. They're either going to come and have employees, or they're going to come and have contracts with Black people.
Sorry,
I'm sorry. Yeah,
they're already.
It's gonna be. They're gonna come and they're gonna hire employees where they can be able to dictate and do what they want, or they're gonna come and they're gonna contract with Black companies to be able to carry out these jobs that they want to do. And I'm saying we can all participate in that across the Pan-African diaspora.
Let's do this, Roger.
Across the whole board.
Let's do this off mic. Let's get together, build a plan. Part of the thing that we're building in this new platform, there'll be a think tank. So it's not just about community. It's not just about classes and lessons. We're going to have places where you can build your neighborhood and have a discussion. Of course, there'll be book clubs because people want to talk about books. But this is bigger than talking about books, y'all. No question. So there should be a space in there where we build this thing that we want to see happen. I think we talk a lot, but you can do. I know. I see you. So let's get together and let's get it done, because we have the capacity to do that. So you didn't ask a question; you came with a solution. I challenge you to actually.
Which is why I would expect that, Roger.
But I do want to hit you up, Doc, because I do want to draw back on some of the past experiments with Pan-Africanism and how it's worked out in the past, and some of the pitfalls, and how can we justly incorporate that. It's capitalism, because that's what it is, and that's what we got to play with right now. But how can we do that in a humane and just way? You know what I mean? Without exploiting anyone.
I think ultimately I would have to come down on the side of Martin King, and that's really that last year of his life. He was really heavily hitting on those ills of materialism, militarism, racism. By materialism, he's talking about capitalism. Yeah. And in fact, one of his close confidants, who the Kennedy brothers said he had to get rid of, Stanley Levison. This is a book called Dangerous Friendship. Ben Cameron has written actually several books on relationship. Why do Dangerous Friendship? Stanley Levison, Martin Luther King, and the Kennedy brothers. King is really writing about the fact that capitalism can't be reformed. There's no more form of capitalism. But that having been said, I think, and what Karen is saying, is so important. The space she's building out, like what we're doing right now, the conversation we're having, the role I see, perhaps the role for me, somebody like me and all of my colleagues, again, we everybody sees, the two of us every week, but, we're part of a whole lot of people. You saw Josie, for example. We provide a little bit of points of entry to exactly what you're talking about, Roger. the memory of what we have done, so that then, having been fully informed on what we have done, what worked, what hasn't worked, what we should probably back away from, we can then strategize and, as Karen says, execute in ways that will allow us to transform the society. And so I'll end with this very quickly, because as Karen said, this is the beginning. When we look at a Martin Luther King, the idea that we should think about Dr. King as we're reading and talking, which is that one little role, that point of entry role, part of the point of entry role, we should now set down the Washington Monument stuff, set down the I Have a Dream stuff, set the white facing, anti-racist, all that stuff. That stuff is a distraction. And that's why it will receive the kind of generous funding to be the center of race conversations. Race conversations are discussions about maintaining whiteness. Do not make any mistake about that. So when people say, yeah, we need to talk about being anti-racist, we need to talk about equity, we need to talk about justice and social, yeah, all that's about maintaining that stratified hierarchy that we heard Josie talk about. And so, Roger, when you talk about the coin of the realm of the world we're in now, the technology, the idea, that's all designed with the idea of keeping the current system, and by that I mean the political economy, in place. If we're going to change that, we have to imagine a world in which that is not the organizational logic. Otherwise, we continue to teach our children that your objective is to master that game. That game can't be mastered. And that's why, finally, as we approach these points of entry that involve those of us who study, the movements of our people across time and space, we've got to realize we have all the language we need, not only to think through a world that we want, but to think about the places where we've come close to or imagine that world. And then going forward, we draw from that and have the momentum and build this different world, because the one we're in is unsustainable. Either we're going to tear it apart and build a better one, or it's going to collapse under its own weight. And the way it looks now, it looks like this thing is getting ready to crack. There's not going to be another round of this, because the ball is going to evict us as tenants. The ball is going to get rid of human beings. So this is literally life or death for the species. And if it's got to be Africa to save the species by saving ourselves first, so be it. But this can't be a conversation about capitalism no more, because that's not going to work. We're going to die. You understand? So hey, I'll stop.
Thank you, Roger. Appreciate
you, brother.
Yeah. Well, so as it was in the beginning, so shall it be. Let me thank you. Listen, this is all divine order. The fact that Josie came in, again, I don't know any of these people who DM me. I don't know them. I just put them in. You know them, apparently.
No, apparently, I tell you who know them. The force that is moving them and moving you through your fingers.
Listen, and then she talks about algorithms and metadata, and then in comes the tech guy, right?
No, this is how it works. And I'm trying to imagine. Have you had Professor Noble?
Oh, she's been on a couple of times.
That's what I thought. I remembered that.
Yeah. And talked about my buddy Ed Young about Blackbird. I mean, like these things, and then he brought up Sinclair, who emails me and texts me just about every day. My brother, at Howard, Howard. I mean, it's just it's not bizarre. I think you never thought you could live to see history play out, but that you'd also somehow be a small part of it. It is humbling. So I want to say every week we come in with an edict, to inform, to engage, to drop these breadcrumbs. And then what ends up happening is transformative. So I just want to thank you for participating, man.
No. Breathtaking. No. Listen, it is a real honor. I wish that, oh man. Anyway, we'll come up.
I don't know where we're going next week, but the ancestors do. So I just want to thank everyone. Listen, since we talk about algorithms, hit that like button. Doesn't cost you anything. Yes. Hold on to your coin. I promise you, we're going to launch something that's going to be, to me, the next thing. And I want to thank the team again. Thank you, Kareem and Donica and Carl and Urias and all the folk that are participating in this. But more importantly, Dr. Carr, your time is so valuable. And
this is the only
reason. Give up it willingly.
This is the only reason to be. I can't, and I want to not only thank you. I want to remind everybody in March when this plague hit, and I'll never forget standing in the parking lot outside the library at Howard and saying, we're not going back. I don't know what's going forward, but this is the moment when we can begin to try to build the thing we need. Because now we're all going online. And so, Karen, when you envisioned this and you started it, you know, I didn't know where we were going, but I knew it felt like, oh, this feels like the thing. And so not only thank you for me and for everybody else, but the feeling of excitement. I feel like James Weldon Johnson in the longest way as he was writing, and he said, this is the creative feeling that allowed this thing to come through me in a few minutes. And here we are 100 years later, everybody's singing it. Me and my brother made that up in 20 minutes, man. But when the thing gets you, that's the moment. And you have seized this moment, sis. I appreciate you for that.
Well, you are my brother.
Yes.
I love you.
Love
love everybody else. Thank you all for being here today.
Yes.
See you next Saturday.
Yes.